Call to order, Gladstone Planning Commission, 525 Portland Avenue, Gladstone, Oregon, 97027. The time is approximately 6:30 p.m. Let's salute the flag. Oh, yeah, who's here? Are we here?
We'll start with roll call. Commissioner Langston.
Present.
Commissioner Natalie Smith.
Present.
Commissioner Malachi.
Here. Commissioner
Poole.
Here.
Commissioner Wentz.
Here.
Commissioner Pat Smith.
Here.
Chair Rowlett.
Pretty much here. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So tonight we're going to do the consent agenda and our regular agenda, which is discussion of municipal code amendments or recommendation for amendments for membrane structures, and then business from the Planning Commission. First, let's do the consent agenda, which has the approval of the meeting minutes and the monthly planning report. Any additions, changes? Again, I like the planning report. It's very nice and concise and gives you a lot of information. Thank you so much.
Good. Glad to hear.
Motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None opposed? Motion passes. Now, you've done the planning report and the meeting minutes, so let's go on to our regular agenda item, and tonight is discussion. It's not a public hearing. And I don't see anybody in the audience besides our liaisons to the city council. Otherwise, I would ask if the public wanted to speak about anything before we started our discussion or our hearing, and we don't have any public. So how do you want to start? With a report from our planner?
Sounds good to me.
Good.
Okay. So we've heard this, I think back in February, Planning Commission meeting. We were talking about just general nuisance code updates, along with the city's code enforcement officer. So kind of a package that I guess, it's my understanding, had been worked on with community input for at least, it sounded like a year, kind of meetings, and what the public wanted to see kind of change as far as nuisance and enforcement in the city goes. One of the higher priority items was regulating membrane structures. There were code amendments kind of structured in other sections of the municipal code, but as far as integrating that into Title 17 of the zoning ordinance to improve enforcement and regulation of where membrane structures were placed, we had kind of talked about some draft amendments, but hadn't quite worked out exactly the specific language we wanted. So this is just kind of the evolution of that initial discussion, and City Council, it sounds like, has also had their own discussion about it and had recommendations to kind of kick it back to Planning Commission to talk about. So we've just prepared this memo going over the draft amendments for different sections of the zoning ordinance. So in really simple summary, we have a suggested definition of what a membrane structure is so that you can identify that, the public can identify that clearly so it can be regulated. Then under building, siting, and design, there's a suggested addition to the existing chapter 1744 in 020 to require that all membrane structures meet the setbacks of the underlying zoning district. Whether or not those setbacks are adequate, that's something that the City Council suggested that you discuss, is setback requirements for membrane structures. This is just suggested draft recommendation. see. And then at the end, which is a bit separate from membrane structures, but it's just suggested updates to the enforcement measures to reflect what we've already talked about with Sean Boyle and code enforcement, and the letter, the violation letter that we gave to you to review. So it kind of just codifies that process a little bit better and would make enforcing membrane structures and other zoning code violations a little bit more streamlined and consistent with how they're handled in the rest of the code. So on the back here, you'll see highlighted discussion items based on City Council direction. That's just kind of a framework to guide you as you're talking about it today in your discussion of items that City Council suggested that you talk about or go over. You have some options of how you want to handle membrane structures. These are just suggestions, and if you're curious, I looked into Oregon City. They did an amendment in 2017 to address membrane structures, so I have their kind of definition that they use and how they handle setbacks and things like that, if you're curious at any point in the discussion. But,
Yeah, I looked at Oregon City briefly, and I think it was earlier than the 2017, and it was already pretty restrictive in the earlier version of that. So what changed? Because I did not see the 2017 update.
And I'm not sure if how they modified it. It looks like they added a definition in 2017 to include, it says membrane or fabric covered storage area, and it includes metal sided cargo container. So it's kind of integrating metal sided storage as well into kind of a membrane structure definition. I don't know if that was in there already or not.
So one of the things that I was looking at was the metal buildings that are kind of constructed. I think, you know, I don't know if the other codes, if they have that or not. I looked at Lincoln City, and I looked at Oregon City and Milwaukee, not in depth, but just kind of looked it over. And anyway, you can continue. I'll stop talking.
Yeah, just something to think about. As far as setbacks, they just say that their membrane and fabric covered storage areas are prohibited when they're visible from the adjacent right-of-way. So it would be a little bit more restrictive there than what we're proposing, which is just the setbacks of the underlying zoning district. Granted, in the commercial zoning districts, there's no setbacks required, so it doesn't sound like it's as much of a problem in the commercial zoning districts, but something to be aware of if you want to be more restrictive. You might want to include more specific setbacks in there for membrane structures. And then as far as standards, they have site plan and design review standards. They're only membrane or fabric covered storage areas are permitted only as temporary structures. So it doesn't sound like, as far as I could tell, they permit them as permanent structures.
Do they give a time frame with that temporary?
No, and I believe the reason for that is because in the Oregon Structural Specialty Code, they're defined, temporary structures is defined as 180 days or less, and so I think they catch it kind of in that when building codes is reviewing it. It sounds like if they're temporary, then they're subject to fire code requirements, but not building code requirements. So a little bit of a difference there when building codes is reviewing that.
And I think Lincoln City took that approach, if I remember right. First of all, you have to buy a permit. Then there's a time frame, and the fire department actually issues the permits for those. And one thing that they're doing that I think we need to do is not just call them membrane structures. We need to say something to the effect of temporary structures, and then that'll give us, I think, better defense and enforcement over just saying membrane structures. Because what could happen is that anybody's going to try their best to get around whatever the code says so they can do it.
Yes.
And my feeling is that, like City Council suggested, is that they use the setbacks that would be required if they actually got a building permit. And to me, a temporary structure would be a structure that's not permitted by a building code, and so there should be some kind of timeline on that structure.
That's why I asked, and she said 180 days.
Right. And we could put that in our code anyway about, how long it is, even though the state has it so people could read the code. So what do you guys think?
So on 3.2, page 3.2, I have a couple comments with this. So the last time we talked about this, there were some issues that were brought up, and so Chief Jolly and Sean had both mentioned that these aren't so they can go out and get somebody, right? And so they didn't feel like certain things were warranted. But the problem is we're not supposed to be writing laws that are targeting specific people being in power, right? They may not be the ones in charge in the next time this is dealt with, and so I don't think the laws should be tailored towards the personalities of people currently running the police department. That being said, the 1706 XX thing seems to have lost the concept we had about current activities. Things like the yard sales, picnics, lemonade stands, or whatever. It seems to be lost from that. And we have that Q&A in back that says that's not the intention, but a Q&A is not appropriate for Title 17. Title 17 needs to be clearly stated so that 10 years down the road, if there's an issue, we can look directly at the law and say this is what it means. And so I think that that section needs to pull that back in, because they were very clear that current activities that you're doing, whether it's gardening or lemonade stand or whatever, is not the intention of this law. And that extends down to 9A and B, because the idea of these setbacks would not apply to things like a lemonade stand, even if it's under a tarp, right? You don't want your kid to be 20 feet back from the sidewalk doing a lemonade stand. You want them up near the edge or whatever, right? So I think it's really important that we don't lose that current activity logic that was addressed in the Q&A side of things. I think it needs to be addressed in the Title 17 portion that we're actually proposing to the citizens. Because if they see it as something that they could get in trouble for, they may just say no.
I thought I read somewhere that it said that, like, for camping and
Yeah,
those
but
type of things.
that's in the Q&A. That's not in part of the law. And so that would not be in front of the voters. And 10 years from now, when they go to enforce it, that has no bearing.
10 years?
Well,
What's the 10-year thing?
I mean, I'm just saying, at some point in the future, when, say, Jolly is not in charge,
Okay.
and some random person whose personality we don't know, right, that Q&A means nothing. It's not legally binding.
Well, I think, and I know what you're saying, is that as, people change, the jobs change, things do change. But I think overall, when policing is done personality-based anyway, so, if that guy sees that you have a expired tag, like I got a ticket right off from a sergeant here a few years ago. He didn't give me a warning. He just said, there you go.
Yeah.
And the other guy, 2 years later, 4 years later, whatever, pulled me over and said, hey, your tags are expired. Have a nice day. If the law had said warnings will be issued first, that would not have been the case. Okay.
Right? So the law should be clear, especially when we're talking about something like Title 17.
All right, so how would you propose this?
Well, I think you previously had some wording regarding this, right?
I think it was only in the Q&A, and it was unclear what you wanted pulled out. Maybe if you wouldn't mind suggesting,
They specifically said that current activities, right, things you're actively doing, are not the target of this law.
Like for a 24-hour
Well,
period?
I don't know if they really stated that, but they're talking about things that you're actively doing, like whether it's gardening or, if you're doing a yard sale and you have a tarp up to prevent it being rained on or whatever. That's not part of this, right? But the way it's worded right now, it is.
Okay.
Right? And, if you have a yard sale in your driveway, that's not going to meet the setbacks.
That's
But
why he was talking about making it more structure as opposed to membrane. Is that
Well,
the
it
reasoning
doesn't
behind that?
really matter what kind of structure it is. There are certain activities that do not apply to this code. And that's based on what they were saying about current activities that you're currently engaging in. And you might look back at the notes from last time, but they explained what their idea was. They mentioned gardening specifically, and their kids in tents and things like that. But
right.
I don't know exactly what the wording should be. I just know that that seems to be lost from the way it's worded now.
Well, it says new language recommended by planning staff to chapter 17, 44020, building, siting, and design at the bottom of page 3-2. 9C, exceptions to these standards may be made by planning department for temporary storage.
For storage, yeah.
Well, of materials.
So that's
Well,
thinking about
if you're
construction
having a
and
yard
things like
sale,
that.
that would be temporary storage.
Or
Within
can
10
we
days
just,
is
could we
not
just
erected
put
more.
something in that, like, E or something that mentions, you know, an example like lemonade stands and
Mhm.
gardening activities or whatever?
Or we,
'Cause
I'm sorry.
it does say that somewhere in the code.
Yeah,
that I
we
read.
do have it in our Q&A section. It's just
I thought it
that
was
Q&A
in
is
the
not
code.
legally binding is my only concern.
I thought it was in the old code somewhere too, maybe. But I think it should be in there somewhere, yeah, in that.
Would it be okay if we added it after in C where it says exceptions to these standards for temporary storage of materials or
I would
current
probably-
activities
But
such as
I'd
I'd
gardening?
probably
Temporary
make C
storage,
exception
period.
and then break that out as
Yeah.
under C.
Okay, exceptions such as.
Because there's going to be multiple exceptions by the looks of it, right?
Okay.
One big
Yeah.
paragraph is harder for people to follow.
Great.
Yeah, and you're talking about different temporary storage, not, you know, we get in a definition of materials and,
Right.
you know, it can be anything, you know.
Right. Like,
That-
I
That's
mean,
my
just as an
firewood, that's
example.
my material, or
Mhm.
those
Yeah,
are,
'cause
yeah.
They said like a car that's not able to be moved, that was a problem, but a car that's being worked on, that's not a problem, right? So like they had a concept of difference between things that are being worked on or things that are being actually participated in versus things that are just stagnant, right? And
Right.
we need to make sure we don't lose that.
And one thing I thought about in this is that we tend to look at things in terms of 30 days or a year or 6 months or 180 days, and I thought to myself, I used one of these for about a year and a half in my backyard in Oak Grove. We got about 7 months of rain and about 5 months of decent weather. So when you think about why are they putting them up in the first place, it's because part of the time they really need it. And I know that doesn't apply to every structure or every application, but I try to pull back and say to myself, okay, so yeah, we got an issue, but why are so many people putting them up? Well, they're lacking storage. Okay, how do we regulate this and reel in what's going on and get rid of, you know, the one that's been there for 8 years and it's got 3 different blue tarps hanging on it? And I know we'll get there, but I agree with Commissioner Malachi that the language is really critical. There's one other language or term that I had a question about, and that was at the start of 17.06, you know, XX.
Yeah.
The second sentence says, it is not intended to include greenhouses or weatherproofing of a vehicle, boat, etc. Not intended, rather than does not include.
That's a good point.
Because if it's, we're back to that, you know, we all know what we mean, and I'm not trying to pick this apart, but
No,
if
that's
it's a
good.
little ambiguous, well then what is it intended to cover? So, I don't know if that's something we can jog that a little
That's a
bit,
great
but
suggestion.
And I mean, and it's really difficult because it says weatherproofing
Yeah.
an individual item. Well, every picture here is
Yeah.
a weatherproofing of an individual item.
But it's not attached to the item.
Says it has to be attached to the item.
That's like an air conditioner cover, a window air conditioner cover, a car cover. Those are different.
yeah.
They're not a membrane building.
And they're directly attached rather
I
than
understand
suspended.
that, but when we're presenting this on the ballot, because it's Title 17, right, they have to go to the voters, right? Is that right? No?
Mm,
I
this
don't
is
believe
a-
so, no, that's not
Yeah.
the process. It goes
It's
to
not a
planning
significant enough
commission.
Planning
and
commission
city
and council approval.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't go
So-
So it would need to be noticed citywide.
Noticed. Okay. So the difference between a car cover and a car port, according to this language, is much, much different. But to the people, there may not be that much difference between them, because they're both intended for the same purpose. So we just need to be very clear about that.
So can we agree that, that we should recommend to city council that we say temporary structures instead of membrane structures? And then define.
We might have to define temporary structure.
And then we have to have a definition of temporary structures. Do you guys
Well, it definitely needs to include those metal ones, like the metal,
Sheet metal.
the sheet metal one, the corrugated type of sheet metal, that there's one on.
Right, and I think Lincoln City did a good job of that, defining some of those things.
So let me ask a question. The ones you see outside of Home Depot, right?
Like
Would those be considered temporary structures?
The sheds, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
a
Oh, I
tough
don't
shed.
know, I was just talking about it's like a pole barn with a
Right.
metal
And-
roof,
Yeah.
and it doesn't go all
Open
the
on
way
the
to the
sides.
bottom, but like
Sure.
3 of the sides are
There's
covered
poles
by.
and they're screwed into usually into
Right.
a concrete
Yeah.
But
pad.
we should know whether certain things are
Right.
considered temporary structures if we're going to put.
Well, you can get a big, big metal building at Home Depot that's
Mhm.
a pretty good size, so
And
what do
don't
you
those
guys
have to be
think?
permitted?
Um,
What does it
Well,
say
that's what I'm
about
saying.
that? I
What-
thought
what-
sheds did have to be permitted if they have
Yeah, I think
If
that
they have
would-
a foundation.
that would fall
Foundation.
into,
Yeah.
But if you don't put a foundation down, I don't know if it comes with.
Probably square footage too.
But then you wouldn't be able to drop that thing in your front yard either. You'd have to
It'd be in the
use the
backyard.
setback.
Right.
You'd have to use like what they say here
So,
about.
I have a question, it might be stupid, about the setback thing. What is the intent? Because setbacks you have all around your house, don't you?
Mhm.
So, I mean,
Well-
on the side of your home, it gets narrower, so is the intent to keep people from the front and the sides and make sure that it's in the back of their home?
So you're not supposed to build on your side,
Mm-hmm.
the side ones at all,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because those are right of ways.
Yeah.
Right. And
Well, depending on how much space too you might have. I
but you're not
right,
supposed to
yeah.
build there.
Right.
The ones in the front, right? Usually is only enough room for the front of the house. Usually the houses are usually really close to where that limits are.
Generally, yeah.
The back of the house is usually the larger limits because people don't tend to put their houses towards the back of the property, right? But I think what they're going for is to not have these things sitting in people's front yards.
Yeah, exactly. But don't you kind of already cover that though by saying that it's not visible from the right of way, or when viewed at pedestrian level?
I think it would depend on how much trees and things you have on your property.
And
Mhm.
okay.
I think the question really is, are those structures at Home Depot, those metal structures, would they be considered a temporary structure that we're trying to regulate? I say yes. That's what I think.
I think that should be a different. I think
Yeah.
that should be a totally different thing.
Category.
Category.
Well, because the
Mhm.
membrane aspect is where
Mm-hmm.
they just go downhill. We got
Yeah,
bad
but-
weather and they go downhill and they don't
Well-
last.
Yeah.
Would
exactly.
you like to see your neighbor put one of those big sheds out in their front yard, in front of their house?
Well, you said in their front yard, no, but in their driveway, it would depend on the setbacks
So in
and what
order
it
to
was.
do that,
Right.
you have to
Yeah.
regulate it with temporary
Right.
structures or
No,
whatever.
I agree, but do we include that in this membrane structure?
Well, we're not gonna call it membrane structures anymore, I thought. We're gonna
I
recommend that we
well,
call it temporary structures.
We were talking about that. We're not sure what the council's gonna ultimately call
What does
it.
Oregon City call
No,
them?
and you see where all I'm trying to say is that we are getting into a
Or
different
fabric
area,
storage.
and I'm
Yeah, or
agreeing with you basically, but I'm also saying that it is different, and frankly, my reaction to something nice and painted that wasn't gonna blow away or look bad in 6 months would probably be different than, what's that bright blue thing that looks like an
Floating in the
umbrella
sky.
floating over there? and-
They're baby
I know what you're
and,
saying.
and so, I agree we need to discuss that, but I don't know if it should be, how we get there with our language without muddying the water. That's
Yeah.
what I don't wanna do.
And the only reason I brought it up is I think we need to be clear, because if we as a group cannot figure out what we're talking about, it makes it very difficult to get the wording right.
Oregon City calls it a fabric membrane cover.
Membrane or fabric-covered storage area, and it includes metal-sided cargo containers.
Like a Connex.
They sound like pods.
But
Are
those
the
are,
pods?
Yeah.
those are shipping
Yeah, like a
containers.
Connex,
That
yeah.
doesn't address a professional carport, which is more of what those are. And that's like what they use so commonly in, like, a mobile home park.
Mm-hmm.
And I
What
mean,
was the limit we put? How many days? We had something in here about how long they're allowed to be there.
yeah, I think it's in 9C on page 3-2. Exception.
Within
20
10
days.
Well, it says,
20 days in one calendar year.
So, were you saying pods would be covered by this? Because 10 days is not reasonable for a pod.
No, we were talking about Oregon, what Oregon City calls them
Okay.
and does. I'm not sure. It didn't seem like they have a time limit other than saying they're only permitted as temporary structures, and I'm assuming they're going off that 180 days in the building structural code.
Well, I know of a house in Gladstone where they actually dropped one of those shipping containers in the driveway.
Yep.
And, it's, for the neighbors, I don't think it's very fun to have to look at that when you're looking down the
Nope.
property line, and then there's a big shipping container out in the front, or in the driveway, actually,
Right.
on the property, and so forth, but it's still a shipping container. And if you're gonna be transparent, what's the difference between that and the thing at Home Depot?
It's considerable,
Well,
Well,
looking it up,
given the blocking of the view and just the general look of them.
I mean, technically, the pod is like a giant van, whereas the membrane structures are things that are affected by the weather.
Yeah, how far in the weeds do you
But-
wanna get?
Well,
with
but
it?
I don't think
also a
we should get
moving
too far in the
pod
weeds
versus
here.
someone parking a shipping container there.
I-
Uh,
I agree with Chairman Roulette about the containers, though.
Oh, sure.
You get
Me
one
too.
down, and pretty soon that'll be the next problem we have.
Yeah, and let's not even go there.
and
Well, I think we should.
Well, I mean,
to
we
make
don't...
sure we don't end up with them.
Yeah.
But I think putting them in with the membrane and the metal-sided, I think what should also be included is the metal-sided whole type of barns. I mean, have
It's
y'all
like a
seen the
car-
one
it's
up
like a
on,
carport.
Gloucester? It completely blocks the road too, and it's
They have
huge.
like an RV parked under it or
Well,
something.
probably, but sheds are completely different. And looking on here real quick, they are addressed in a different place.
Okay,
Sheds,
so let's
garages,
say
dwelling
that-
type of.
Yeah, they are, because I've
Mhm.
looked that code up.
Mhm.
Pods are addressed elsewhere in the code as well. I'm trying to look that up
In our code?
in our code.
Yeah.
Yes.
Outside of Title 17.
Worry about the garden sheds, because that doesn't seem to be a problem anyway.
What we can do, though, if we are concerned about those types of structures, is we can have this refer to those other
Yeah.
sections for the other types of structures.
Th-
That way people don't have to search
That's a good
for 'em.
idea.
Does it seem reasonable that maybe the city attorney should wrangle out the language on this instead of us?
Well, I think we're just trying to define, what is it, are we gonna call it a temporary structure, or are we gonna call it a membrane structure? Or, if Oregon City says membrane structures and shipping containers, I mean, that's, to
They're
me,
not
a temporary structure, and then you could put in the metal buildings that are actually constructed, those buildings that you're talking about, even though they're
Yeah,
open
they
on the
aren't
front.
sheds. It isn't a shed.
Yeah, it's
No.
a constructed
temporary structure.
building of some sort, so that should be in there somewhere
it's
that
probably
defines those buildings.
Like a carport
And there's a
type.
definition of a carport.
And we do have a definition of accessory structures that's very loose. So, I mean, we could capture some of this more appropriately in there if you want it regulated. So, something that fits better in an accessory structure would have to meet that, 20-foot front yard setback in your residential area. It's kind of, there's options on how you want to organize it.
Yeah, I think something that's constructed not to code should be considered a temporary structure.
So I do have a question about the carport thing. So I know we've looked at some properties where the parking was on-site, and they didn't have garages, right? Like usually it's in the bigger lots, right? Are we telling them they can't use carports to cover their vehicles? Is that the idea?
Yeah, but I think when you build a building, and if you're gonna build a carport, that's part of the building permit.
And it's
on your
permitted.
plan that you added that carport on there, and it's built to code.
So we're saying the carport is okay if it's permitted.
Well, it's
And to
permitted
code.
and built to code, yeah. I mean,
So is there
then-
anything in
But
this
that's
that
a
would
wood
indicate
structure
that it...
versus-
Yeah, so we need to make sure that if we're saying that certain types of those metal-sided structures are acceptable, we need to make sure this isn't excluding them because of that.
I mean, I know what the difference is between a carport and a metal building, I think. I mean,
Well,
you
it's
can
like
buy
saying,
those.
you know, I can't define porn, but I know it when I see it. You gotta
I mean,
Well, but isn't there a clear
have it written
definition?
this
out.
one is a carport.
Do we not have a clear definition? I mean, I've done a lot of contracting.
Right.
For a carport,
No,
there are
I think
specs,
we're
the
amending
county
the
has them.
structure.
A
That's what
carport
we-
shall be
In
this
the
size
zoning
and it'll have
code,
drainage.
Carport,
Fabric covered
it's
members.
And a
1706,
carport-
070.
And a
And they've got a
carport
garage.
may
They've
be
got a garage
permanently
there,
attached
too.
or part of a home and permitted and an add-on and meet codes. And a membrane structure can be put in the driveway if it meets codes. But this started with the discussion of a metal carport or a metal structure that wasn't a carport really, or isn't part of the home, and that also isn't necessarily one of these membrane structures. So I'm not trying to dissect this all, but that's exactly what's going to happen when people interpret this and somebody buys one of those and our officer shows up and the person says, well, I didn't want one of those big ugly membrane things. I bought this because I wanted something that wasn't going to blow away, and now you're telling me I got to take it back to Home Depot. So I'm just trying to be very careful about what we're saying and what the definitions are. I know we're in the weeds, but sometimes that's where you got to operate.
I agree, but I think if you want a carport, you're gonna have to get a building permit for it. It's gonna have to be approved. I mean,
No,
that's,
I understand.
but if you wanna put up a metal building, you don't have to have a building permit. So with what we're trying to do here, you would at least have to put in the setbacks, and it'd be a temporary structure that's got a date, timeline, you know, and certain code that we're trying to do.
So it sounds like, in your case, this is
Take it
really
down.
geared towards non-permitted, right?
In my brain, that's
Yeah.
kind of where I was going with it after I thought about it for a while.
So I think we could alleviate some of the concern by adding non-permitted to the title of that section. This wouldn't apply to anything that's been permitted. If they come before us for anything and we approve it, this doesn't apply.
There was one thing that came out of the city council work session, and I believe it was Councilor Tracy that mentioned it. He talked about siding, which in a sense would, and I believe, jump in here if I have this somehow out of context, but he preferred that siding on these should be done similar to if it was actually a permitted structure.
Exactly. I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to bring it up
Which
too.
seems to me to make some sense.
I agree with that,
Can you,
totally.
can you explain that?
Well, in other words, if you wanted to put a membrane structure up in your property, it couldn't go anywhere that you couldn't put a permitted structure on your property.
Yeah.
Is
That's
that
in our
what you guys
suggested
got out of it?
language.
If your property, if your house went the entire length of your property, and all you have is a driveway but no garage, you couldn't stick it here because you wouldn't be allowed to build a garage here.
Right.
So you couldn't put that there even. And anywhere, even if you had a garage, if you put it in front of the 20-foot setback, in front of the house, you wouldn't be able to build a permanent structure there. Therefore, you should not be able to place
A temporary one
temporary
either.
structure there as a way of getting around the permanent structure.
And that made sense to me.
And I'm
too.
good with that.
Assuming we're not counting the current activity stuff that we talked about earlier.
Yes, yeah, and you
Temporary.
have, I think, and what you talked about, the Q&A, the Q&A was just interpretive material that was going to go out to the public if the language that's on the previous page had been adopted.
Yeah.
For amendments to section 804.
Yeah.
And section E of that did have an exception for garden or other temporary uses like that. It sounds to me like the term membrane implies fabric. And the question is whether you think that we need to say membrane or metal and expand it to the kind of thing that Libby was describing.
So I think Libby's concern is less about what the top of it is, so much as what the sides of it are. Like if it's just the poles rather than walls, for example, right?
I think
That was the thing you were bringing up.
I'm more concerned with the aesthetics, basically. You know, frankly, the little ones that are like little camping tents with the white thing on it, and those aren't so bad because it's just the top part. They don't really bother me so much, so that person doesn't want pollen dropping on their car, that type of stuff. It's when it becomes like a permanent thing that blocks off.
But those would be banned by this.
I understand that, and that, but that's another thing. I'm just saying with Well, yeah, I guess that's it. But sheds, it doesn't count sheds.
Yeah.
Because, and the way I understand it, like Oregon City says it flat out, permits from the city are required for some residential accessory structures, garages and sheds.
Anything that's
so
going to
why
require a foundation, I think.
well, why not just say garages and sheds require a permit? And then we don't have to worry about saying about setbacks, and we can just focus on the membrane structures and the.
They may not require a building permit though. Building codes has kind of a square footage threshold, and I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I understand they increased it, so there's more flexibility.
You're correct, because I looked it up for a storage shed in the backyard for a friend, and I looked it up in our code book, and it is based on the amount of square footage.
Yeah.
So building permit may not be
It
required.
was under a certain square feet, as long as it's in the backyard and not visible,
Exactly.
you can build it without a permit.
I want to say it was 400 square feet, but I could be
Tom?
wrong.
Can I ask a simple question, maybe not simple? In my mind, I guess the question would really be, is why is the code being questioned? And what is somebody trying to get to? And my understanding is that the code was trying to address the ugly settings around town.
I think it was more specifically that the police officers were trying to address the complaints they were getting about that.
Correct.
About the junk, you mean?
About the stuff they took photos of, right? They took photos of things people were complaining about, and they're trying to address that.
So some of the question is then, by talking about setbacks and putting particular sheds or whatever in there, is how do they look? You know, how do you make them so they're gonna look okay, so we don't have a bunch of junk pots around town?
Yeah, but I think along with that, even in my mind anyway, just the membrane structures are the most obvious. If everybody, you know, like 5 houses in the neighborhood had them and 5 didn't, I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, it's a big eyesore, you know, people that like to have things a certain way when you look down the street and then you can't see something because one of these things are poking out in the yard. That's why, in my mind, that's why houses have setbacks. You have to build your house, you can't go past this line here. It's for the streetscape.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but, you know, to be honest, the ones that they took photos of, like these do not block the view nearly as much as,
But
like,
it's
the
an
pickup
obvious,
truck in the yard
right.
next to me.
But I think there's 2 things, though. One is
Yeah,
aesthetics
or
and the
RV.
other one is the junk, you know, I mean, there's a lot of those that have junk just piled up, or like the one Pat showed us in his neighborhood.
And
It's just a sore thumb in the neighborhood there.
Not only that, some of these homes already have garages.
Yeah, and these aren't blocking the view of anybody, right? There's bushes next to both of them. I
ones
understand
that-
about them not looking aesthetically pleasing, but there's no view being blocked.
But the ones that are in front of houses block your view
They do.
from the right of way. They can't
Not
help
in
it.
cases, there were bushes.
If they're in front of the house, they can't help but block your view of
I
them
would-
from the right of way.
I'd add that a lot of it is, we've got the 5,000 square foot lots and they're pretty tight, and, you know, then, and not to get into trying to dissect it all, but, you know, if you got a 7,500 square foot lot and it's kind of deep, and, you know, then it'll work, or you might even have something that's sticking out a couple of feet beyond the legal limit, but nobody really notices. But obviously something 20 feet long when you got a 20-foot yard, is a real issue here.
That's
So
right
this
up
is
to the
probably a really good time to point out that as less and less street parking is available for these properties, more people are going to try and do this. More people are going to be trying to put up carports and stuff when street parking becomes less available. Because there's a parking issue, right? And so they're trying to make more parking, right?
Well, I like what Tom said about what is the intent of it, because if it's about symmetry and stuff looking down the road, are RVs allowed to be parked out in the front on the side of yards? I truly don't know this, and I'm truly just asking this. Because I think that really just makes my skin crawl much more than these things. when you're walking down and there's an RV, it's just parked in people's yards.
Well, in general, we don't allow parking in yards. There are a few exceptions on some of the properties, but...
Well, there's a guy on...
They've put in the gravel, but, and
Yeah.
you know, you can't wonder, was that permitted to make that,
Yeah.
that
The
stuff?
guy in
you know?
Gloucester poured a pad in his front yard,
Yep.
and the fifth wheel or the RV will barely fit on the pad. But he did that because he can't park on the street. So there's always going to be a way around stuff. And I think,
But can you pour a pad without a permit? Or have you then crossed the line for changing the porousness of the
So,
the
I mean,
yard, if
we
nothing
don't-
else?
We don't have
Like-
consistency in town. So like my driveway at my house right now, during some construction, we had 6 people parked in my driveway and they were not squeezed for space. They were all in the driveway. It's a big driveway for that size of lot. And other driveways that are like right around the corner here, like, they could barely fit 1 car, right? So we do not have a consistent amount of space across town. We do not have consistency on how it's paved or not paved. We don't have consistency on how much line of sight there is. Like, there's no one rule that's going to work for every property.
Correct, and codes have changed from the 60s, when you probably could put in a huge pad of concrete, and nowadays, when I'm pretty sure you can't.
Well, we discourage it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's stay on task
Yeah,
here
I have
with our
a
membranes.
question. So, the code is kind of similar to a spec book for construction. So specifically, we're looking at 17.06.0XX.
The definition.
Is that line item specifically for membrane covers? And then, like, we're talking
It'd
about
be a
like
new one for that.
about metal structure that keeps coming up. There's going to be another section for those particular items, right?
So this is a suggested definition to add to the definition section to allow us to better identify and the public to better, classify what is a membrane structure or a sheet metal structure. That's regulated by this other section of the code that refers to membrane structures. If someone in the public is reading this section 17.44.020 building siding and design, and they read membrane or fabric covered storage area, and they say, what's that? They can refer back to the suggested definitions. It's supposed to encapsulate everything you want regulated based on the setbacks in here that are suggested.
But couldn't there be other definitions that cover the particular structures that
Yeah.
have been brought up?
And then they could also be referenced in this later section if you want them regulated to meet the setbacks of the underlying zone or whatever more stricter setbacks you would want to place on this, if you do.
Okay, thanks for getting back on topic there.
So are you suggesting that we should add more definition to a membrane structure to include other structures that might already be included somewhere in the definition?
I think if we're going to enforce the membrane, or, we could say membrane, temporary, and other,
Sheet metal.
and temporary structures, and include sheet metal
Yeah.
stuff, and have it all in one spot in the code. I think what they want is to get some updates done so that they can enforce it easily. And I think City Council's recommendation on only allowing those where buildings would be permitted to be built, in my mind, is a good recommendation to do.
I'd have to agree.
And
sense.
there's not a whole lot more that, it's not like a huge thing we're looking at here. We just need to define what we're looking at and, get that, and where they're permitted. I would like to see just something that says how long they're permitted, or...
It does say down here about the 10 days or the 20 days in a year.
Well, those are not, I think those are like garage sale
Yeah.
tents and
Those
stuff
are those
like that.
current
That's not-
activities.
I mean, you could make them similar to Oregon City, where they're only permitted on a temporary basis, that 180 days per the building code. In here, the way that it's drafted is that they're permitted as a permanent structure as long as they meet the setbacks of the underlying zoning district.
Man, I don't.
So, I mean, I think earlier we were talking about the difference between this and the other stuff is that these are not permitted, right? So, I think I would want to be careful about us saying that we're permitting these, because the other ones are permitted, right? They're you know, whether they're the ones at Home Depot or whether they're like the garden sheds in the backyard or
I think we're
whatever.
talking about
Those
building,
are permitted.
building permits
Like a
as opposed
permit.
There's no prohibition on membrane structures
Yeah.
right now in the code. So you would be just regulating where they can or can't be placed with
Mhm.
this addition, but you have the flexibility, of course, to prohibit them and only allow them as a temporary structure.
Yeah.
That's the way I would like to go, but.
Yeah, and so I think we're looking at these as being non-permitted
Prohibited.
temporary
Yeah.
structures.
Because it would
Right.
take up too much time to try and regulate.
And then maybe some definition of,
Non-permitted, do you mean not allowed, or do you mean not requiring a building permit?
not requiring a permit, because the other ones that we talked about earlier, we do require a permit, and this wouldn't apply to any of those.
Okay, so
Right.
let's be clear when you say not
Yeah.
permitted, because I think you understood it to say that
Mm,
they're
not allowed.
allowed.
Not permitted.
Because we don't have a rule prohibiting them.
Right.
That's different from
Mm-hmm.
whether permitting is
Right.
required. Yeah.
So we have buildings similar to these that we require permits on, that would be exempt from all of this, right?
Well, like, say a shed that's
Right.
under the threshold of building
Right.
code,
Right.
they wouldn't require a building permit for
They
that.
don't require a building permit either.
If they're a certain size.
If they're under a
yeah,
certain
it's based
square
on
footage.
square
Yeah.
footage, right.
And they're not in the.
So what would keep them from falling into this if we add the metal to this?
Generally, they're in the backyard, they're not
I
in the
think by
front yard.
metal buildings, I think you could get around what your concern is by calling them open-sided.
Right.
Open-sided sheet metal roof pole buildings.
Yeah, and
Well,
a
then-
storage building actually has a floor and a cover
And sides.
that
and-
does not.
Mhm.
I mean, you know, part of it. I realize you could create it, but.
If you're gonna build a permanent structure, you have to have a building permit.
Right.
She's just saying that we don't, though.
Not always.
For this, if a
Well, a
shed's
shed
under.
you don't, because it's this many square feet, but that's the exception is, I can't remember how many square feet, but when you mention that.
May I make a suggestion? If you adopted or recommended adoption of a regulation that would only regulate fabric membrane, as, you know, ignore the metal part. The metal part could be added to that definition later if there was a need to expand it. If it continued to be a nuisance in the community and people just substituted fabric for metal. But I think what the council wanted was, for you to share and get input from the public was interested on the thing which is the most commonly addressed nuisance matter right now, which is the inexpensive fabric covers and things. So if you make a law regarding those, we could expand the definition of those types of things. Open-sided metal roof would be added on later. But rather than trying to expand what the council referred, maybe you could focus on the part the council referred and then find out how you feel about pros and cons of that and the approach that they suggested.
Okay.
I think we should focus on the definition and then go down to the general standard.
I think the definition, unless I'm missing something, seems pretty clear to me.
I like
Membrane or fabric-covered temporary buildings.
All right, so then we won't talk about the other ones.
And
then.
again, that's not as
No, no,
trying to quiet anybody, but
Yeah, yeah.
it seems to me that covers it. If someone
Yeah, yeah.
else can enlighten us as to what
I
else
feel
is
like this-
needed.
My concern was that if they can't put up the membrane structure, then they'll start putting up those aluminum.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you could
Or
put
the
it
storage
anywhere
pods
and
would
park
be
an RV in
next.
it. So, to me, I disagree with Counselor Mills. I think we need to define those, regardless of what city council.
If I could ask our counselors a question, what was the overall long-term expenditure for the Portland Avenue upgrade? I want to say 25 million over 20 years. Updating Portland Avenue, wasn't the total going to be around $20 million, somewhere in that neighborhood?
Well,
Everything.
something like that, but it included infrastructure improvements that are already part of the comprehensive plan and transportation-related plans for the city.
Right.
So,
But it was fairly significant expenditure for a town of 8,000 or 9,000 people. A lot of money. And to dress up one street and leave everything else unfixed doesn't seem to be a very good overall policy for our city. I don't know anybody alive that loves to have a lot of regulations placed on them, but they're a necessity. I always think construction. At the time I grew up and before that, house fires were pretty common. They were not a unique thing. Fire departments almost never go out on fires anymore, and because of building regulations that have come in electrical regulations and all this other stuff and in-house sprinklers and all the stuff to regulate it, we don't have them anymore. And if we didn't do that, we'd still have house fires and people dying. And I'm not suggesting that untethered buildings are going to kill anybody, but the idea is that regulations in and of themselves shouldn't be considered to be onerous if they take care of something that needs to be fixed. And having kind of a crummy, allowing certain segments in town to let their property go and to deflate the value of others who own property in those areas doesn't seem to be the right thing to do. My soapbox is put away.
So do we want to just, for now, do the membrane structures, and then we can always add on the other stuff later, now that we've had a good discussion about it? I think everybody's, thinking about it. City Council will probably discuss that too.
Yeah, like what was said, it needs to be kept focused. Like, this one's on this. If we're going to talk about something else, and that needs to be addressed so it's not confusing. Keep it simple.
All right, so temporary membrane structures we're going to talk about, which we've done a lot.
I'm sorry, to clarify, did you want the definition to include membrane structures and other temporary buildings, or just keep it
I think we'll just
specific
say
to
membrane structures is what I'm hearing
I
from
think
the council.
the title you have now, membrane or
Commissioners.
fabric covered storage area.
Okay.
So that was a good discussion. Anyway, so what do you want to recommend?
Well, so we do have some slight changes for the exceptions to be broken out and to add the exemptions for the current activity stuff. Don't know what the wording is. Do we have any other changes to it?
So you're talking about those things that come down here? Those
9C.
9.
Yeah.
Again, I had mentioned some concerns about the language that says it's not intended to include.
Right, so that one
I think you've already got that.
will not include, or does
yeah.
not include.
Will
or
not
something.
include.
And
Change it to, it does not include greenhouses or weatherproofing.
Yeah.
Yeah, the greenhouses kind of makes me nervous, talking about things that could get out of hand. I mean, I could see people having the greenhouse, and it's getting all moldy on the inside, and they haven't actually grown anything in there for 6 years, but my God, they're allowed to have a greenhouse out there. I don't understand why that was included like that.
That's a different issue, though, right?
Yeah.
But just leaving greenhouse out of there, so it...
This doesn't
With
apply
this particular
to that.
definition,
Sure.
right? It could be in a different location.
Yeah, we can remove
May I say
greenhouse.
something about 9C, the exceptions? I think, I remember driving down Glen Echo one day, counting all of these types of structures that were up there permanently, and I saw a guy who was working under the hood of his car in his driveway on a rainy day, and he had one of these structures over his car.
Yeah.
And the next day, when he had finished working, the structure wasn't there. That's the kind of temporary use that would be fine. I have no trouble with somebody putting something up to do a short-term project and then putting it away. It's what the citizens were saying they don't want is when it just stays up forever with a motor.
It's also commonly, I see them also used a lot to cover wood.
Yeah.
Or
And the
that's other
kennels,
thing.
which I can't see the picture, but...
For a legal
Definition of temporary might be a key to this whole thing.
It is.
I think so.
I think so as well, because what really has driven this is that they're permanent, and after a couple of good winters, they're just starting to look bad, like me.
So how many days do you want to see these temporary structures up?
Well, they've got it defined in there, right? Let's just call it temporary, if you want to call it temporary membrane structures. Are we in agreement with
Do you
that?
want to limit them to on a temporary basis only, or do you want to permit them permanently also?
I don't think.
What would be the
any-
purpose of permitting them permanently?
Right now, they're permitted there's no prohibition. So you'd be adding a new prohibition saying membrane structures are only allowed on a temporary basis of X number of days or months.
That is what the whole intention is.
Okay.
That's what I thought too.
Well, I think that we were
Or
going
do we
to
want to
say,
prohibit them completely?
no, but I think we want to let people have them with these things in mind, that you can have it in this spot, it's out of sight, it's not, upsetting the neighbors and stuff like that. The question is now, do we want to put a time limit on that?
I think so.
Well, it's in here already. I think that's great.
Well, I
that
think
makes
that
it
was
really temporary. If it's
10
10
within 10
not
days
to-
is not erected more than
Those
20
are
days.
for
But we're
the
talking about
garage sales stuff.
Yes, they'd be permitted on a temporary basis. They wouldn't be allowed to they wouldn't need to meet the setbacks, so they can be anywhere on the property. If they're, under C, they meet those exceptions. Otherwise, they're permitted permanently, and they have to meet the setbacks of the zoning district, is how it's structured right now.
I'm not clear on what case the city council would want these structures to be up permanently.
Yeah.
Are you guys aware of any?
Permanently?
Yeah.
Well,
No, the existing law is that since there's no law against it, they are allowed to be.
That's what we,
But
Right.
What we're trying to do is enact a law that would make them fully permissible on a very temporary basis.
Basis,
Okay.
Defined by the proposal.
And actually, I see the mistake there for the time limit. C actually probably, is that to mean that if someone's going to do it, then the planning department has to say it's okay? Is that what C is? I mean, C is actually a little unclear to me. At first I read it like you could have the lemonade stand, and then reading it's like, well, does that mean that in order to have the lemonade stand you need to go through the planning department? So that's why I guess it does need to be specifically put in
No more
there.
than
That
so
if
many
it's a
days.
lemonade stand, a garage sale, or fixing your car for less than 2 days,
Or
then-
you're moving.
So on
I've seen
residential,
people with one
I
in the
think this wouldn't
driveway
apply
for a
as
week
much.
while they're moving.
But like at a work site or something, I imagine they would go to the planning department and say, hey, can
Yeah.
we cover our work materials for the next 20 days, 30 days, whatever? That would probably come before the planning department, and it probably wouldn't be us. It'd probably be them, right?
Yeah, but so I see C probably means that, correct? Is that what C means for like commercial type of stuff?
The intent is to just give us oversight if there's, something there on a longer basis. But I mean, if you're going to prohibit them as permanent structures and just make them all temporary, then it sounds like maybe you're talking about different temporary kind of levels. If for a lemonade stand or somebody working on their cars doesn't have to meet the setback and it's fine on a temporary basis of X number of days, but somebody storing their wood all winter,
not
or
acceptable.
things like that, if that's something you want to totally prohibit and only allow these kind of just active current activities, memory structure for current activities. I mean, it sounds like there's different ideas coming up.
I think that would need to be added about letting them in. But going back, that I'm stuck on the actual definition, which I think is really good, but as Les said, is not intended, being excluding. I think greenhouses should just be taken away from that altogether. Let that become a problem whenever it becomes a problem. But I don't think we should blanketly say, yeah, you can have a greenhouse.
Well, so
I promise you, people will put up greenhouses to store their junk in.
so then you'd be
That's-
automatically banning all greenhouses the moment this law
No.
passes,
Well,
and that's not an acceptable law.
no, they could be in the backyard. They could
No,
be in the
this
backyard.
doesn't care if it's front yard or backyard.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna
does,
ask.
Well, I
So-
thought this is what it says about not being visible from a budding right-of-way.
So
and
there's
stuff
two
like
types
that.
of things we're talking
Can't
about
have
here.
any-
They'd only be temporary,
Garage
but
sales
they still have to meet the setbacks.
and the structures that people are using for garages, or that type of thing. So the two issues are the garage sale kind of thing, nobody has to worry about it as long as you don't leave it up for this long. That is not even gonna be part of code enforcement or anything unless they don't take it down. The other part is, I wanna put up this membrane structure so I can put my boat in it, and I wanna know where I can do that and how long I can do it. That's what we're talking about, correct, City Council?
Well, then if you're going to say that's what it's about, then I could still put one up to put my junk in front of my house?
Not in
Not
front
your
of
house,
not
it
front.
has to be in the
It could be
setback.
it has-
You have to
It
meet
could
the
be in the
setback.
back, right?
You could put it in your backyard.
Yeah.
But not according to this. This
Well,
does not care about front
in-
yard versus backyard.
According to this, we can. According to
Not
this,
currently.
We're not talking about the garage sale or the lemonade
No,
stand.
that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying, there's no language here that says backyard. If
No, it
if you're
just says-
intending only
no.
front yard to be
yeah,
covered.
it just says
that's
setbacks
stipulated.
in front of the house and in view of pedestrian level. It says
It says that there.
shall be located behind the front building line of a primary structure.
And shall meet setback requirements of
Right.
underlying zones.
So that means as long as it's in the back, you're good.
As a temporary structure.
Well, no.
Right now, it's worded as
it's
a
not.
permanent.
It's permanent.
But we're talking about there are no such things as permanent membrane structures. That's what we just discussed,
Sure.
right?
Yep.
So that would mean that if we take out greenhouses, for example, all greenhouses in the city after, say, 30 days are banned.
Yeah.
Unless
I
they're
see what
behind the
you're saying.
house,
Well,
unless
we're
they,
not-
No,
like,
it
they
doesn't
don't.
change
No,
it.
if we
We're
make
not
them
gonna
not
talk about
permittable,
green
then
houses.
it can't happen.
Okay.
Behind the front building line.
We're getting off track here.
Order. We're not gonna talk about greenhouses right now.
Okay.
So let's take the greenhouses out of that.
Well, if you take it out, you're banning it.
No, we're
not.
taking out the
According to
You're
discussion.
not banning anything by taking it out.
If
If I don't say doghouse, doesn't mean they're banned.
You're putting a ban up on permanent membrane structures, which most greenhouses are. This specifically says it doesn't. You
All
take
right.
that out, you're putting the ban on it.
It's a membrane structure, if you don't say greenhouse, but it's a membrane. To me, a greenhouse is a glass
Yeah,
building.
that's
and
it.
you're
Not
not-
all of them.
Okay,
I don't
well,
know nothing
if
about
they're
it.
not, then they're
Glass and
membrane,
plastic.
they're covered with membrane.
Yeah.
That's a membrane
Whether it
structure.
be vinyl or
Right, and
plastic
this
or whatever.
currently says those would not be banned.
Right.
So if you're changing it to say they would be banned, that affects a
I
lot of
didn't
people.
say it would be banned, you just take it out.
If you take it out of this, it does ban them.
I would
don't see
argue
it
that
banned, I
it
take it
allows you
out.
to have them if you don't have it in there
If
as
it's
being,
not- That's what I
being
kind of
banned.
said too.
Well, it specifically says that, we're saying that they will be
What do you think?
only temporary
Melissa?
structures allowed.
If-
And this, go ahead.
Sorry, if you're making membrane structures only allowed on a temporary basis, and you don't exempt greenhouses from the definition, then they would only be permitted on a temporary basis like other membrane structures.
If it's a membrane structure
Yeah.
where,
Mhm.
They could, there's some that are probably clear poly too.
Yeah.
A lot of them are
Co-
green,
coverage.
actually.
Mhm.
What's that?
A lot of them are clear, like a green.
And they turn yellow
Tan,
and
yeah.
they get ugly.
Yeah, but we're not trying to
But-
ban people that currently have
Well,
green.
no, I understand, but then it comes back to what are we trying to ban? And people are still gonna be allowed to have their car, or their boat, or their whatever thing out there, whether or not they have this little canopy over it.
They've
I
got boat
mean-
covers just like they've got car covers.
right now, we're not trying to ban anything, we're
Well-
trying to
Just
figure
trying to
out
move 'em out of
where to
front
put a
yards.
membrane structure.
Yeah.
We're not
Okay.
banning
Front yards.
them.
Yeah.
Well, we're not currently putting anything in here that says front yards.
Behind the
Just
setback of the
behind-
building. So
behind
that-
front building line.
That depends on
primary
how wide
structure.
your property line is, but yeah.
Well,
If it's
Well, it
Yeah.
has to be
You can
behind
do it.
the front line of the primary
Okay,
structure.
yeah.
So that tells me it can't be in the front yard.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that seems
I
fairly
think
clear.
that's fairly simple and
Right.
clear.
I mean, you can still have your wood pile on the side of the house with the tarp over it. And it's, as that, I mean, you can argue, well, the tarp being directly on the wood would be the same as the
Yes.
thing being
Cover it.
attached to it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Be like covering a boat with a
Yeah,
band
yeah,
around
yeah.
it or
Yeah,
something.
they do
And
have
that's
boat
legal.
covers.
Right,
That's
car
legal.
covers.
Like, just like car covers.
And I would add that your pile of wood, typically, and even most car covers, part of what we're dealing with is the height of these things, just the bulk of
That one
them.
would not be banned.
I know we can't get into setting a
Yeah.
bunch of specs on
It's
that,
behind the
but
sight line.
the physical,
Behind the
presence of it far
Okay.
exceeds someone's 4-foot-high wood pile behind their fence.
If you can build a garage there, I guess it'd be okay. I don't know, I can't tell, the picture is mostly black.
pictures are pretty
you know.
bad.
Yeah, the pictures didn't come out too well.
So what I think the question is, if the city council wants us to answer, the main question was, do we want to allow the fabric structures to be in a place that would be permitted with a permanent structure? That was the question. What do you say, yes or no? Yes?
Well, if you can't put a building there, then you shouldn't
That was
put a
the
temporary
question
structure.
they asked. If you, or for our recommendation, if you can't put a building there, should you be allowed to put a membrane structure which currently is not prohibited? Yes or no?
No.
No.
One question regarding that. Do we have limitations on putting structures next to a house, is there a limitation on how close they can be? Like, say in the backyard, can it be abutted to the house, or does it have to have a setback from the house?
Well, again, it's different in different zoning districts, but generally speaking, in your residential zoning districts, accessory structures, and like I said, that definition is really loose in the code right now. They, in the side yard and rear, either one can have a 0 setback from your adjacent property, but only one structure.
Like a patio cover.
If it's attached, it's my understanding that building codes treats it differently. If it's attached to the house and they require a building permit.
I was thinking specifically like the
And if
the
it's
wood, the
attached,
pile
you
of
get
wood
into a
covering
height,
it.
Back.
you also get into a height issue and...
Okay.
But like for a shed, you could have it on a 0 setback, property line setback on your side yard, but not your front. It's
Right.
specific. So.
Well, and that's what all this stuff below 9A, B, and C is about, correct? Is saying that it's got to be, back, like you were saying. It's got to be in the backyard, or it's got to be in the
It'll
back.
be located behind the
All
front.
membrane or fabric structures. What is this stuff? What's the point of this stuff written down here? Is that to be included with it? Is it already included? Is this an
So
idea?
that's new language, new
Okay,
language.
so if this is included, with the thing about the lemonade stands and the
Temporary.
fixing the car and stuff, if this is included, I'm sorry, getting back to where taking out the not intended, the greenhouses would be okay because they wouldn't be right in the front yard.
Okay.
So I do have a question about 9B.
Go ahead. Yeah, I was going to say.
So from Gloucester, standing in the middle of the road, I can see past my house, past my neighbor's house, past Hereford, and into the property behind Hereford. So would that mean that, according to 9B, there could not be any structures on my property, my neighbor's property, or their people behind their house in that sight line?
As long as it's along the street.
Well, there's no street there, right? But it's visible from the street.
I was going to ask about that too.
That one I think is
So
a
basically, that's preventing you from
No, and I
being
think
able to
this
put
is
that
just
on the side of your house
confusing
if you have a large enough lot.
Yeah, you can never put anything on the side of your house.
Yeah.
When we discussed it at our work session, you'll see in the paragraph from the minutes, it's on the very last page, see that, I don't know what, see that, maybe it's the very first page, yeah. Look at it. Councilor McMahon, about the 4 lines down, Councilor McMahon suggested striking B shall not be visible from the abutting right-of-way in the industrial zone. If you're covering an RV that's stored in your backyard, those things are 9, 10, 12 feet tall.
You can
So
see 'em.
If you have one of these structures, you're going to be able to see it because fences are limited to 6 feet. But we didn't feel that, we thought if it was in the backyard, it'd be okay to see it, from the front, as long as you got it out of the front yard. So that was a section that there was not unanimous,
So we could just strike B, which would say you could put your RV on the side of your house. Now it's not blocking when you look down the street. It's at the side of your house.
But it's...
side of the house, we still have to comply with setbacks. So
Right.
it's at
Yeah.
the
Which would
very
be
edge of your
located-
lot. But if you have
Right.
a side setback of only 5 feet, you probably couldn't fit an RV.
Yeah,
Right.
most properties in town are not going to have any room for this on the
That's
side.
not your.
Yeah.
They're not going to.
And I'd refer to this...
Others.
I'd refer to this one photo that shows one of these behind a fence. And yes, I can see it from the right of way, but it's clear in the backyard. And this isn't necessarily going to be something that is
I
going
don't
to
see a fence there.
inspire... Yeah, it's really hard to tell, but if you're behind, my point is, if you're behind a fence and you're behind the front line of the house and you're meeting the code, given the way complaints and things work, you're probably not going to trigger it, even if you're not in compliance, because you're a little out of compliance. And I realize everyone needs to be treated equally, and I'm not trying to, go into a gray area.
This one probably doesn't meet the side setback.
But the point I'm trying to make is, we're trying to improve the appearance, and it's going to be obvious what's going to trigger complaints and what's probably going to have someone look the other way. So how is this practically going to work out, and how are we going to get to the original charge of get these things out of the front yard, and if we've got them, let's not completely prohibit them, but regulate them in a way that we take care of the problem, we don't have these ugly things out there 5 years in a row, because eventually you don't even have a cover on them, they're still sitting there.
Yeah.
So strike B,
Yeah,
are
I
we
think
in
it's
agreement?
redundant.
Yeah, I think so.
And
Alright,
I
strike
think-
B.
yeah.
Noted.
You're saying what?
And then,
I think it's redundant.
any more discussion, let's focus on 3.2, 3.3, and 3.4, the recommendations. Get that to city council. Is there anything else that you see in there that you think we should talk about?
In regards to 3D, what kind of time frame are people going to have once this goes into effect, before they're effective? Like, it's going to go into effect immediately. Are people going to get this $500 fine immediately?
So I wish Sean was here to talk a little bit about that, but I'm sure he can answer questions too separately. But it's my understanding, and what we've kind of worked out based on his suggestion about how to improve the enforcement process of the zoning code, is built into these suggestions under B. So he has flexibility there, the city has flexibility in when they start enforcing or requiring the daily fine to be extracted from the violator. So if they're making kind of what's been going on right now, if with our current violations I've been coordinating with Sean, if they're kind of actively coordinating with us to remediate the violation, I think what Sean's been doing is he hasn't been requiring them to pay the fine unless they're kind of a repeat violator who aren't coming in to get the required land use approvals, things like that. So there's a lot of flexibility there, and that's built in here, and it's consistent with how the rest of the municipal code's enforced, so it refers back to that section in here.
So we're not going to be sending out fines to everybody on day one or anything like that?
No, what we've been doing is if there's a violation that comes up, it's a violation of Title 17, there's that kind of template violation letter that we send out saying, because, you know, I mean, a lot of times people don't know they're in violation of the zoning code, and it, you know, it's unfair to just send them a fine right away and not give them an opportunity to come into compliance. So the violation letter template spells out, you know, hey, you're in violation of this section, specifically explains a little bit about the violation, any detail we have, if it's in violation of the municipal code or a previously issued decision, and then gives a time frame in there. I think it says the violation needs to be remediated within 30 business days. A daily fine will be assessed starting on the 31st day from the date of the violation letter unless, and then you see A, B, and C.
So
I'll point
out
that it says business days, so that's a little
Right.
that's a little longer.
I would recommend on the form letter you send out for people that are in violation of this, that we include information about what the setbacks are on their piece of property as part of that letter. Because a lot of people probably don't know, especially things like side setbacks. Most people don't even know that that's a thing.
So that's the kind of detail that we've been including, just the specific violation. Your structure is encroaching 3 feet into the required side yard setback. To remediate the violation, you would need to move the structure to meet the setback or remove it entirely from the property. So we've been trying to give as much information as we can. And Sean's, you know, been in charge. He's the code enforcement officer, but he'll, you know, conference with me to get just kind of detail about the specific land use or zoning violation to put in the letter to help people better come in and more quickly come into compliance.
And these types of things are complaint driven for most of it anyway, so if you call and say your neighbors, you know, you're tired of looking at this thing, then he'll go over there. But he's not going to drive around and just take pictures of everything that's out of compliance and write tickets to everybody. No.
I did notice everything was changed to 30 days, so that was good. Thank you.
Any other discussion?
I'd like to ask my colleagues here, is there any concern that these buildings, or not concern, does anybody besides me think that these ought to be tethered also? They can't just be stuck out in your yard, subject to wind and issues like that, that these buildings be tethered or attached to something as part of having them?
I thought we were only going to make them available for so many days.
But that'll be winter time, of course.
Okay.
Yeah,
Honestly, I think that that's really, I don't think we can really gauge all the possible types of structures that might go up. Tents, for example, are going to be staked to the ground. They don't need to be tethered to the house. Right?
I'm talking more about membrane buildings.
Well, my point is, I don't know what all the types of membrane buildings are. I don't know what the requirements are to weigh them down or tie them up, or, you know, how they're normally mounted. I would not feel comfortable making a broad stroke guess on all membrane structures.
I like the idea, but in practical sense, we might get ourselves in a can of worms.
I agree with
Yeah,
you.
like an example, like those 10-pole like covers for like parties. Those do not get attached to houses, right? They get staked down like tents would.
But
If you
I would
do
consider that tethering.
Well, but that's my point. Like
Yeah, but
there's
you
so many
can do
different
that or
ways.
not. I mean, it depends. You might pound stakes in the ground, and the next guy doesn't, and then it goes flying away.
Yeah.
But
Even
if you
assumes
start, I agree
responsibility
with,
for it at that point.
with less, if you start defining all this stuff, you get yourself in a little trouble.
I would feel comfortable saying that they have to, I don't know what the wording would be, but, you know, comply with proper safety instructions provided with the equipment.
Efforts should be made to secure or make, you know.
Can you
Yeah.
put something in there like that?
I think temporary structures, and it would be good to check with Mike Funk, but they're subject to the fire code, so fire and safety requirements already. But we can certainly put that in here, that temporary structures must be, or per the definition, say, the in-building siting and design. We could put something in there, say, saying temporary membrane structures will be required to adhere to the fire safety.
Well, I
code.
wasn't about so much like what our fire department says, so much as I was saying like whatever the instructions that came with the product actually said on how to properly secure
Per
it.
the manufacturer's instructions.
Don't use rocks to hold it
Okay,
down.
okay,
right?
for manufacturers and
Put that
For
in there, don't
anchoring.
use rocks.
But I mean, because, you know,
Bungee cords.
different products
I can live with that.
might have different instructions, but they should follow them.
Don't say Velcro, because that's a brand name. That's
Yeah.
copyrighted, so you can't say Velcro.
What is the
Manufacturer
Infringe on
instructions.
somebody's intellectual property
What?
rights if you do.
Per the manufacturer's instructions for proper anchoring.
And so, any more suggestions on the recommendation of City Council that, we do recommend that they are going to, that we want to update the code with the following?
Can we have her read back what she has, make sure we're on the same page?
Sure.
For clarity, first, did you want to make them on a, sounds like only permitted on a temporary basis, even subject to the setback?
You know, I don't think
or-
that's part of the recommendation, and I personally would like to, but I don't think that we should be doing that at this time.
I thought that's what we were
I thought we were
talking
gonna
about.
put
Well-
something in for the lemonade stands and
The lemonade stand is already defined.
where are the lemonade
Uh,
stands defined?
because she's adding back in the language regarding current activities being exempted.
Yeah.
So things like gardening and all that kind of stuff are not part of this.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
But I-
thought
So something's being added that's not in here.
Yeah, she'll be reading that out.
Okay.
I think, you know, I agree that they should be on, you know, my feeling is there should be a time limit on it, but I don't see any way that we're at this point going to be able to enforce that or have the ability to do that and keep track of all that stuff. So at this point in time, I agree that we should at least get started on this and get the siting address and then go later in the weeds to the, you know, other types of buildings and maybe put time limits on them. Actually, if you look at one city's code, they actually make you buy a permit and then renew that permit on a basis of time. So I can buy a permit today, and they're not cheap, to put the thing up anywhere that is permitted, and then I have to renew that permit on a regular basis and pay for that. Now, that's like a way to go, but that's not where we're going tonight. We're recommending to City Council some changes that they asked us if we would discuss, and I don't think at this point in time it's appropriate to try to put time limits on them.
But they are going to be temporary, not permanent.
Are we gonna say temporary? I thought everybody had a problem with that. I don't have a problem with it, but
What are we even talking about now? Honestly, I don't know.
Yeah, this
Because-
is-
are we talking
okay,
about what
there's
she
two
said
issues
about
with
the...
time. There's the lemonade stand garage sale stuff, which is defined.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is, do we want to put a time limit on where we're recommending that they be permitted, which is where you could site a building? Currently, there is no time limit on that. And I don't really think tonight is appropriate time to recommend that we do that. And if you disagree with me, that's great. I mean, you know, you can do that.
I would agree with you,
So,
Chairman.
do you think the intent right now is just to get them out of the front yard?
Just to get them out of the front yard into places that are permitted and start there. I think that's what City Council would like us to do.
So I think then, as part of that, what we could do is recommend that the city follow up at a later date with whether they want to go with time limits or with permitting process.
Yes, I would be all for that. At the end, we could write a little thing about, we really think that we need to look at metal buildings, you know, any temporary structures, other or temporary structures, time limits, permits, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, because honestly, time limits and permits are either or. It's one or the other. You either get them to pay for it, or you ban it. You can't do
Well,
both.
Lincoln City says you can have it for this long, and you have to renew your permit,
Which
and
is the
it costs
permitting.
this much money to do that, and it frankly is not inexpensive.
And they're probably doing that because the weather's so bad down there that, you know, the renewal process is a way to say, hey, that thing doesn't look like what we started with here, so
Yeah,
it's probably
and
being
drive
used.
around there, it looks pretty damn good there compared
Yeah.
to Gladstone. It looks like junk compared to that city.
And the price of living there is a lot more expensive than living in Gladstone.
I don't think so.
You know,
I'd like to
Jump
buy
it up.
some property right on the beach for as much as
No,
I have my house
I'm not talking
for.
about on the beach, I'm
No,
talking
but
about
even-
the city, you know, and really the beach thing is a whole different zone and everything. But in the family neighborhood, which I have a house down there,
Right.
in a family neighborhood, it's a nice place to live. And the properties look good. And they don't have all this, you know, obviously they'll blow away anyway, but
Right.
they permit everything down there. And, they've got things dialed in pretty good there.
Yeah, and I think part of what we have to keep in mind, again, as I said earlier, we've got a lot of 5,000 square foot lots, a lot of smaller lots. You got a bigger lot, it's easier to make it happen. And I think to myself, okay, in a practical world, Sean goes out and says, get that thing out of your front yard. You understand that you're violating the code. What's the first response from a citizen? Well, I'll move it alongside or in the backyard. Well, you can't do that either. Now they're down here saying that you're being unreasonable, even if you're being reasonable. So, you know, I try to look at how, you know, we're back to what are we trying to do, and how are we going to get there, and have the citizens accept what we've done because we didn't go too far, or their perception is that we didn't go too far, because there's a point where people feel you micromanage them, and then you start to get this pushback, and there's a lot of changes coming. So I'm just sensitive to that, and wanted to put that on the record.
I think Oregon City and Milwaukee are good examples of, you know, I don't see that stuff in the incorporated areas. In the unincorporated areas, drive down Uphill Road right behind Fred Meyer Oak Grove.
Just north of there on
That is
the
the membrane structure hell, and abandoned vehicles
Yep.
and junk piled up. And I feel for those neighbors, because honestly, that house next door that should be worth $300,000 or $400,000,
sell it.
they probably couldn't sell it for $200,000 if they tried. And that's a good example of when you let this stuff go, what happens. And I
Right.
think that's what we're charged with here, is making recommendations to City Council to back up what they want to do to clean this city up.
Well, you know, with the telecommunications stuff, we had made the permitting process such that the things we desired were easier to do and easier to permit than the things we didn't want done. There's no reason that couldn't happen down the road, this kind of stuff, where
It's a
things
lot of
that
work.
are more desirable
Right.
and cheaper or easier to get permits for.
So, Chair Rowlett, the three questions in bold print near the top of page 3.3. Do you have consensus on answers to those to come back to us with?
I think
I
we
think
have
we're good on the
answers for all three of
definition,
them.
right?
The definition's
From the
adequate.
definition, right?
Well, we have an updated one.
So
Okay.
you read that.
Do you want me to read it back really
Yeah,
quickly?
let's
so we
go
can
ahead and
check
have
that
her
off?
read back the updated one, because it's not what's in here right now.
So as I understood it, we're not including metal-sided buildings or anything in there, so,
Decided to make that a separate
So it would just be the definition, the draft definition as proposed, but on the second sentence, we're updating that to say it does not include greenhouses or weatherproofing of a vehicle, boat, or other individual item, etc., and no other changes.
Should that part be moved down to the exemptions or the exceptions?
Then that would mean they could be located in the front yard setback.
Why is
So
that?
we're just defining when someone reads, when they see membrane or fabric covered storage, and they say, I wonder what that is, they're going to go to this line item and they're going to see this definition. So it doesn't
Correct.
necessarily need to be part of.
So this says you can park your boat in your driveway if you wrap a tarp around it that's attached to the boat. But you can't park your boat in the driveway if you have a tarp that's attached to the boat. That's the distinction.
Yep.
Right.
Correct.
Can you clarify what you just said? So if we move that exemption down to 9C, it changes the meaning?
So it's not technically an exemption, it's just what's defined as a membrane structure, that
I see.
greenhouses aren't a membrane or structure per this
Okay.
definition.
Yeah, you're
Here.
wrapping your boat.
So they're
with
not
a tarp.
regulated by this
Structure, yeah.
1744 building siding and design.
But when we put that other exemptions down there for the, or did you put the stuff for the current activities up in there? Which section is that going in?
So the breakout for exceptions for current activities would be in 9C. So it would be exceptions to these standards, and I wanted clarity to whether or not you want to include maybe made by the planning department still. But for temporary storage of materials, as long as the membrane or fabric covered storage area is removed within 10 days. So that would mean you could do current activities like lemonade stands, gardening, for mechanical repair for up to 10 days, and not for more than 20 days in one calendar year, and that they're not a nuisance. So if they become a nuisance at any time, then they would need to be removed. So it would give the city
That's
flexibility.
reasonable.
Yeah, I think that's good for verbiage.
Okay.
Good.
And we got rid of B.
Yes, and B would be deleted. And then just going off your conversation earlier, if I could make one suggestion, it sounded like maybe there was a question mark about including more flexibility for the side yard setback in the backyard. Currently, for example, in the residential zoning districts, for accessory structures like a shed, that you can have them right on the property line. There's a 0 setback. So if you included in here that membrane structures would be subject to the setback requirements for accessory structures, then they wouldn't need to meet that normal 5-foot side yard setback. You could have one of them right on the property line if that was your only you didn't have another accessory structure on the property.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
That would help the people with their small lots.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, most of the sheds tend to be right in the corner of the lots, not in the middle of the yard.
Yeah, they're usually over in the corner or back up against the...
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think having B gone, having A clarified like that makes it better.
Okay.
What do you guys think?
Sure. But it still doesn't answer the 3 highlighted that
Well, it does.
that Michael said.
Well, I think
The suggested membrane structure definition as
Adequate.
modified is adequate.
Right, right.
The restrictions on temporary metal buildings is not being included, and the setback requirements proposed has just been modified as well.
so we're gonna recommend not to include the metal buildings because it needs further discussion and
Right.
work.
And we're
I
going to
think we
also
should
recommend...
include it, and then if it becomes a problem, take
Well,
care of it then, as
and they had
opposed
also
to
recommended
not
we wait.
include it and come back to it. I mean, it's kind of like the other stuff, that if it, like Les was saying, if there's pushback, and then address it. But
Well,
I don't know.
are we
I
gonna
think
call
if
them
the
metal-
greenhouses are staying, then the metal things,
I think the
would make
problem I
sense.
have with that is that we're still talking, we're gonna call it membrane structures, and then we're gonna say metal buildings in there. That's, to me, kind of weird.
And if people have
It's a different
questions about,
chapter.
they can ask it.
That's what I was gonna say.
Okay,
It's a
I'm
different-
good.
That's my thing. I
Let's
mean,
go for it
I'm
then.
for just however they want to leave the metal in there. I think the metal should, the
Okay.
sheet metal should
And
be left in.
ultimately, they can make that decision whether to keep it or not.
All right.
Whether we have
It
to
may be
or
a
not.
discussion that you wait on, and it may be something that by the time they're ready, that they'll act on that.
What do you guys down there think? Is it a big deal, or should we just say, yeah, metal buildings too?
I mean, I think as far as metal buildings go, I think we have to be careful that we're talking about the metal buildings that are designed to be temporary, because we already discussed that the metal buildings that are not designed to be temporary are fine, right? And they're covered in a different part of the
there's
code.
a difference between a building and a structure, right? I know we're really getting into it now.
Oh,
but
it's helpful.
Yeah.
So like I said, the accessory structure definition in the code there's a lot of gray area there as what is an accessory structure or not. I mean, you could go an alternate route and include membrane structures in your accessory structure definition, but it sounds like it makes more sense to keep them separate. So you could clarify then your accessory structure definition also to include.
Does the accessory section allow for them to be in the front yard?
No, so accessory buildings are required to meet all of the normal setbacks in the residential zoning district, except that one accessory structure can have a 0 side or rear yard setback on a property.
So what part of the accessory language does not cover what we're trying to do here?
So it's just a gray area in terms of what's actually an accessory structure. Usually, you know, when we're interpreting the code for people that ask questions, if they come in and they say, I want to build a shed, we consider that an accessory structure and would let them build it right up to that 0 side yard setback. But it's not in the code. It doesn't say sheds in accessory structures, so it's not very clear.
I guess that what I'm asking is, would we lose anything if instead of doing all of this, we just added membrane structures to the list of types of buildings and accessories? Would there be anything we'd be losing from this?
I think there is a lot,
What would we be losing?
because it's not a building. It's a temporary structure.
The accessory.
And you're gonna put it, we need to keep it in chapter
separated
8,
like this.
not put it in 17 and 8.
And my,
Well, this is how about putting it in 17.
and my original comment or question was, because Chair Roulette brought up these metal covers in lieu of a membrane type structure, and then your comments were about a building.
Well, the sheds.
Right, and I'm trying to say that the code's ambiguous, and so how it's going to be applied or what we mean or the difference between a cover and an actual building and a shed are different things.
But it sounds like, as far as the front yard, we don't want any of it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, well, there's no confusion about that, but what we do allow, you know, beyond the setback, what we define, if we use the word structure versus building versus shed, we're saying different things. And how it's going to be interpreted, or what the public is going to do, or how the public is, as she had mentioned, you know, they're going to try and get around it and say, well, no, that's actually a greenhouse now out there.
So let me ask you this. In the backyard next to your house, which ones should we allow for covering your wood?
Yeah.
Well,
the
okay,
wood
you're going to build a shed, fine.
Right.
What about the others? Are the metal coverings okay for wood or any of that?
You can put a tarp on it currently, and that
Yeah.
doesn't change with any of this.
Yeah.
So if I don't see what that issue is there.
Well, I was using it as an example because it
But-
sounds like all we're really trying to do here is get the stuff out of the front yard.
But if you put it in the building code section, then all of a sudden it becomes a permit, you know, a building permitted thing that doesn't apply, it doesn't comply with any building code. So that's not the place, in my opinion, to put that. I think what we're trying to do now is just update nuisance definition, and we're treating these as
So
a
they can
nuisance.
be enforceable, yeah.
Right. And the truth is, we haven't gotten any clear direction that a metal building or a shed is what we really should be delving into. I mean,
Well,
from,
the
I mean,
question
I
was raised whether it should be expanded because there are metal
Right.
structures that are of similar purpose.
Right, and how long if the membrane buildings go before those start showing up in their place,
Yeah,
because they're not
yeah,
regulated?
I mean, is there not something that already addresses it? I mean, like, I feel like we're looking at something very specific here, and it's only a small portion of what's really there. So is there not something already there that covers that stuff?
Metal-sided buildings are prohibited in the design review section unless they can meet specific criteria about where they're visible from. But it's only, I can only implement that from a planning perspective in a design review situation. So anytime somebody's calling in and saying, what kind of shed can I build? They can build, you know, a metal-sided shed right now in the code. So there's
Or
no
a metal roof carport, or one of these
Exactly.
things from Home Depot, back to the original example, that isn't a membrane structure, and I consider it an improvement, but it's still obviously something you'll see more of by default.
But it
It's a
sounds like
temporary
we don't
structure.
care
As
if it's
long
in the
as they're out of
backyard.
the front yards, that's a major step. So any kind of a temporary structure shouldn't be able to be in front of the home.
Yeah, and that's why I was asking, because if all we did is say that a membrane or fabric covered structure, storage area or whatever is a accessory, whatever you said it was,
accessory structure.
But then
an
you're talking
accessory
about
structure, then all of a
permanent-
sudden all this is already covered.
It's not though, because you're making it a permanent structure and it's not intended to be.
Are the accessories
by-
permanent?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's, these types of buildings, membrane and this other type of metal, temporary metal structure aren't designed to be permanent structures by the manufacturer or anybody. That's why I think the word temporary in there somewhere, and it'd be helpful. So I think we should treat these right now,
So
from what the
some of these-
recommendation of the city council was, is to include the metal, temporary metal structures as the membrane structures, the same thing. And that's gonna make it simple to regulate those without going into the weeds on it.
I agree. It should just be included, because you're saying, if it is a permanent thing, metal thing that's screwed down, they're saying, well, no, it's not temporary, it's permanent, then they would have not gotten a permit for it, and then they would have to remove
Well,
it.
they don't have to have a
correct?
permit if it's under 20 by 20.
Yeah, there's a threshold, a square foot
There's
threshold.
one definition or a category that you called, say, open-sided storage structures. And then you defined it using the membrane definition and a similar definition that would say sheet metal on the roof. You know, but basically, you're talking about pole supported structures, that either have metal or a membrane to cover the top.
Yeah, so this one would not be covered, because it's not open-sided.
Let me see.
Oh, well, yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. I guess open-sided isn't good enough. I was just thinking.
Open-sided metal structures.
Yeah, we could add open-sided metal structures to the list.
But have you
Exactly.
seen the one on Gloucester?
Which one?
It has canvas sides.
It has a metal side, I thought. It looked metal when I drove by
There's
today.
one over on Exeter that has canvas sides that
But this
drops
one
down.
on Gloucester, I'm pretty sure is metal. On the east side, when you're driving west, that you see. I don't know.
That's why-
If it has those metal sides, would that be a structure that should be at least in the side yard, not in the front all the way to the street? Because this is right down to the street.
Yeah, it is. To the sidewalk, I know what you're
If
talking about.
But
you
anything
can't-
is gonna be in violation.
If you
after
can't
this.
put a permanent structure there,
Then it shouldn't be
it
allowed.
would not be permitted to have.
If it's covered by our code.
If it's included in this.
Well, if you can build a garage there, then it would be okay. If
If
you
you
can't
could build a garage there, you could with a permit. Otherwise, you could not build a garage there.
But if you could build a
If the
garage there,
permit
you'd have
said they
more
could.
room, and it wouldn't be such an issue typically.
If they could.
Right, I mean, but most of these yards, in a practical sense, are pretty tight. We
They
get
would
that-
never get a permit for it.
Yeah, so it would never happen.
So that's what I think, that's what the question is. Right now, the question is, shall we include the metal temporary building structures,
Well-
temporary metal structures in with the membranes?
I'm okay including them if we can define temporary.
Yeah, that's
because
what I was gonna ask.
if we're relying on the person at home saying, well, I don't intend it to be temporary, that's gonna bite us.
It's not a permanent structure if it doesn't meet building code.
Right. How about any temporary structure not requiring a building permit? to
Yeah, but then
site?
the 20 by 20
But the
storage
20 by
unit
20.
doesn't
Mhm.
comply.
Right.
Some of those metal ones, I'm sure, like, you can get engineering from the company. So
Well-
does that make it a permanent, fixture then?
Right.
Like, if they could provide you engineering on the calculations.
But could you get a building permit and put it in your,
Right.
attach it to your house or something and live in it? Or park your car in it, or?
I don't know.
Put it in, how does he set it in concrete?
Right, secure it.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But you
Well,
said...
if we leave this, excuse me, but if we leave this language in there, or include that aspect, we're kind of giving you something to work on, aren't we? Aren't we helping you out here? No, actually, I'm being serious. We're going to give you this, and you'll decide in the end. And with our discussion and with the discussions you'll have, ultimately, I think you can massage this language and make it work.
I'm hearing that you definitely agree on the membrane construction part, and you're leaning in the direction that it ought to include the metal too, but you're just not sure how to word it properly.
Well,
And the
I've got it.
council may, that may be the listing we have to do, is to figure out how to change the wording.
I think Randy was right in that if the structure was designed by the manufacturer to be temporary, that might be the thing we have to go on, because we cannot rely on the citizen to decide if it's temporary.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, what do you...
Temporary or permanent is just how you use it, and that's defined in paragraph C.
Right, but if you get one of the ones that's 4 poles and a roof, the manufacturer is not going to recommend that as a permanent structure, right?
Yeah.
Even if you could make it permanent,
Yeah.
it's not recommended as one, right?
But I'm pretty sure that one on Gladstone, the guy just screwed it together himself. I don't think it had anything to
That's
do
true.
with
I
it.
think
Can't rely on the
I think we're missing
manufacturer.
something here. I think there needs to be in this what you said about whether, in order to determine if you use the wording right to indicate that if you can't obtain a building permit and it's not a building, then you shouldn't.
But building permits are not required for most.
No, let me finish. Let me finish. What I'm saying is, if what you just said, could you repeat what you said about you can't put a temporary structure where you could get a building permit?
Right.
That needs to be clearly defined, saying that right off the
That's right
bat.
there.
I think that's good and correct. So that's what we're going towards on the,
What do you mean it doesn't say right there?
A is actually covering that. This says that it has to be somewhere that we could put a building.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't say if you can obtain a permit to
But
build
we
it.
don't require permits for pretty much any of those Home Depot sheds.
No, but you're still missing what I'm trying to say.
You don't get a building permit.
It
but you
shouldn't be
could've
allowed to be put there for long term
Yeah.
when you're capable of getting a building permit to build a permanent structure.
So what she's saying is, regardless if you can't get a permit to build something, you can't put anything there. then.
Yeah,
Don't
and that
put
doesn't work.
You
anything.
can't get a
You don't
permit to build
those,
anything in
and
your
you're
front
a-
yard.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So it has
So
to be
you can't
behind
put
the
it there.
setback.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so then you can't put it there, right? That just means they're not gonna put it there.
Had you said that, like that shed,
gotta
that
ban
doesn't
these
have to be
things.
behind it, it still has to be
Getting way out of hand
on
here.
the side yard. It can't be in front of the house. Isn't that
It'll
what
have
you
to be
had
on the
said?
Right, accessory structures
Cannot be in
if there's
front.
only one, I mean, they still have to meet the setbacks,
Mhm.
but there's, in the residential zones, which are different than other zoning districts, they can have a 0 side yard or rear yard setback, one accessory structure like a shed. But that has nothing to do with whether or not they need a building permit. So that's kind of a separate,
But can it
it's
be in
based on
front
square
of the
footage.
house? Like, here's where the house is, there's the road. It can't be stuck out in front. It's still gotta be on the
No, they
behind.
need to meet a 20-foot building, front yard building setback.
Okay,
Or
so
the
then,
front
In
wouldn't that
residential.
cover the metal buildings that are put there? Wouldn't that already
If they're an
cover the
accessory
metal?
structure.
Pardon?
I think we're making this way too difficult.
well, if the accessory structure.
If we can't figure it out, how is the
If the
layperson
accessory
gonna
structure
figure
can
it out?
only be this big, right?
There's no definition for an
Okay,
accessory, it's not
that's what you're saying
specific.
about
Yeah.
undefined.
Accessory structure right now says accessory use or accessory structure means a use or structure incidental and subordinate to the main use of the property and located on the same lot as the main use. So it can be a lot of things.
So that doesn't seem to indicate permanent
Sounds like
or
anything but a
temporary.
house.
Mm-mm.
But it's gotta be behind the house line.
Yeah.
It can't be down at the side. That's what I'm saying. We don't have to do any,
No.
education other than
I
when
have
you go up the
0
first time, when
line.
Sean Boyle goes up and says, oh, by the way,
Yeah.
that metal thing you built there for your RV, it can't be in front of your house.
So
And he can already get rid of that right now.
I think A covers that.
Yeah,
9A.
I'm actually back to not understanding why that doesn't cover everything we're trying to do, because that doesn't require it to be permanent.
I agree.
It can be
Mhm.
temporary, and it already has the setback requirement, right? And what is not covered by that?
9A.
No, that is covered by it,
Yeah,
right?
it's-
Accessory,
mhm.
we're actually changing this to match that requirement.
Mhm.
It doesn't say shall be in the setback requirements, it's not behind the front building line. It's
But-
20 feet from the front property line in residential.
So the issue is that people who have their houses set back further would have room?
Yeah.
I believe
That
so.
structure potentially, if that
Could be
that
up
house
toward the
was
front.
marked out at 25 feet, that structure could be 5 feet in front of the house.
The houses, I mean, it sounds like y'all are talking about the stuff down in the flat part of Gladstone. I don't know what y'all meant, but if that's the case, how many have more than 20 feet?
Not a
Not a
lot.
lot.
I
It'd just
mean-
be a
I
unique
mean, really.
situation.
Hardly any.
And would it be that big a deal if it was 5 feet out? I mean, it would pretty much, I think, get the integrity of what we're going for by just following. It's got to be 20 feet. Everything's got to be 20 feet back from.
Would 9A cover that, do you think?
It would, if you wanted to go that route and put membrane structures in the definition of accessory structure.
But then that would make them permanent, wouldn't
I
it?
don't
No.
wanna
Would
do
make
that.
them permanent.
No, but
And-
you just said it's permanent or temporary. You said there was nothing in that definition that required them to be permanent.
Well, you would take away your ability to be able to organize it into a temporary category, unless you specified
Really
it
don't want
somewhere else. I mean, it's kind of implied if
Don't
it's
care
an
anymore.
accessory structure, you're not explicitly saying it's temporary anywhere.
I
So
have a
there's
question.
no restriction on
Just
how long.
who is on first and who's on second? No,
What?
I understand what you're saying here, and I think to cut to the chase, the biggest concern is that we're addressing these things aren't sticking out, and we're going to live with them, and however the council ultimately gets there, no matter what the decision is, we're going to have at least a 20-foot setback, or you know, it may be the front line of the house. You might offer a little flexibility depending on the zoning, or you might give them a little wiggle room, but I think that ultimately that's where we're going, and it has to be simple to understand and simple to enforce, and we can't have somebody getting irate or feeling offended and deciding to tackle this thing or you know, legally challenge it because they're the one person that, you know, just decided that, by God, it's my turn to stand up. So I really think that we've given you plenty to work with. You know what our concerns are. I appreciate having the liaisons here, and I think that planning can take these thoughts, refine this, and let's make a recommendation to the council with some room for them to finalize it. Otherwise, I don't know if we'll ever get there.
I do want to make one more comment. So,
Sure.
you know, we're talking about the membrane fabric cover, you're asking about the metal structures. Honestly, the real gist of all of this is you don't want any structures in front of that line. It doesn't matter what kind of structures. You really don't want any of them on a permanent basis.
Right.
We don't need to specify what kind of structure it is. We can say that every structure is included. It doesn't matter what it is. You don't want a kid's tree house sitting on the sidewalk. You're not wanting any structures in front of the house.
I think we need to stick to the membrane structures right now.
My point is that's really what this is all about. They don't want anything in front of the
Yeah.
house line.
I think we're trying to regulate the membrane structures, or make it a clearer definition. And we're not doing anything. We're going to recommend the city council that we think that they do need to be regulated, and that the setbacks are a place to start. And they're going to do what they want to do regardless of what you and I recommend to them tonight anyway.
I agree.
And I don't think they're going to deviate a long ways from our discussion here. I mean, you've
Gosh,
got the
we
freedom
were
to-
struggling with definitions and figuring out, it's, you know,
We
for
had
the
some-
citizens, it's not going to be easy if we make it too complicated. It's
We've
got to be
had some
pretty-
really good discussion. I think we need to make a recommendation. Does anybody want to make a motion that we recommend or not recommend something?
I recommend that we recommend what Chair Roulette just said.
That doesn't count.
Yes, it does.
You make a
Somebody craft that motion.
Go ahead, Buzz.
Anyone want to recommend the language that the planning department has proposed?
Yes,
With
that,
the changes that you discussed?
yes, as a recommendation for a starting point for city council to discuss.
And that it needs a lot of work.
And we will also recommend that city council look in the future about whether they want time limits or permitting for these, but not for this immediate term.
I would suggest putting that question in there.
Well, that's why it's being
So
put
it
forward to
doesn't
you.
come up.
Yeah.
I second that motion.
Second the motion that we accept the draft amendment as it's written.
I thought we
That's
deleted
some-
B.
we have
With
some-
our change.
We're gonna strike,
With our
yeah, with the
recommendation.
Deleting
suggested changes.
B. Well, no, you gotta say
we-
what it is,
she-
because I don't
we
know
have-
what they are, and I wanna be clear what it is.
That
So
is
ho-
more than that, though.
Definition.
How about if the planner goes over the suggested changes, and then you guys make a recommendation based on the changes, and then we'll move forward from there.
Okay, good
I can make,
suggestion.
okay, go ahead, yeah.
So, starting with the definition, we have a recommended additional definition for membrane or fabric covered storage area to include an area covered by a tarp or fabric membrane that is either attached to rigid framework, natural feature, or some other structure that's used for storage. It does not include greenhouses or weatherproofing of a vehicle, boat, or other individual item by tarp or other type of covering, as long as the covering is attached directly to and covers only the particular item. Did we want to add metal into that first part of that definition where it says an area covered by a tarp, metal, or fabric membrane? Or do we want to leave that out?
Leave it as is.
Yeah.
Let's just
someone's
leave it
gonna-
as is
yeah.
for now, and make, you know, a recommendation that city council look at the metal things.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think we get back to someone's gonna argue and say, that's not
And
membrane.
chicken coops. And
Yeah.
Chicken.
So it would be the recommended suggested definition, modifying that second sentence.
Correct.
Yes.
And then the new language for building, siting, and design, chapter 17.44.020. 9A would be modified to include for accessory structures. So it would say, shall be located behind the front building line of the primary structure and shall meet the setback requirements for accessory structures of the underlying zoning district.
Yes.
B would be deleted, and C would be modified to include a breakout for exceptions for current activities such as lemonade stands, gardening, temporary mechanical repair, and storage.
What would why would we want storage in there?
Garage sale.
For like a pod.
And people
like
move
if you ordered a
sometimes,
pod.
I mean, you are gonna.
Temporary storage.
Yeah.
Can you
They
put
got that.
temporary
Got
storage?
it.
Temporary
Window.
storage.
If your neighbor's got this thing up for 10 days and it goes away,
I don't
you know,
care.
you live with
Yeah,
that. They won't have time to fall apart and get blown away.
And then we would be adding a section E to 9 that would say any membrane structure will be secured per manufacturer's instructions for proper anchoring.
Okay. I'm okay with that. Anybody opposed to that?
If you leave out B, you have to re-letter the others.
Yes, I would be relettering them.
Right.
So C would become B, D would become C, and E would become D. So it would be A through D.
So to make a motion, how would you like us to refer to these things?
you just refer to what you said.
Well, Tammy can wordsmith it.
That's
better.
what I did. You said I couldn't do that, but you said.
All right, Ms. Vanek, how do we do it?
You can make a motion to the recommended changes that the county planner just suggested. So, and we can review that on the tape to make sure we've got it all correct. And that's how I would do that. The recommended changes by the county planner that you just...
Okay, and that would be in 17.06.0XX.
Suggested new definition.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
4020, yes.
Additional.
Are we voting on both of those, or just one?
Everything is red.
I think everything is red.
they gonna do that?
Did Commissioner Smith make a
So-
motion?
I'm still not sure what,
Okay,
so
I'll make the
all this
motion.
is 17.44.020, that's all that's included?
No, it's also
No.
the 1706 with the unknown number that'll be addressed later.
Okay.
But you could just say everything as read by her just now, and because they're going to review the tape to write it out.
Yeah, okay, I'll let you do it. I'm not still not sure.
Okay, so I'll make a motion that we forward the, what is it called, the recommendation as read just a few minutes ago on the tape. Anything else? Oh, and that we have City Council also look into the metal buildings, look into the possibility of permitting and or what's the other thing? Not time.
Excuse me.
What's the time thing?
Just time limits.
Time limits.
So you're wanting the council to review metal buildings and timelines?
Time limits.
Time limits.
Time limits.
Oh.
And purchasing permits,
Yeah.
time permits.
I second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed. Motion passes. I'll do this. All right, and now we're on to the business from the Planning Commission. Let's start with Pat today.
I really don't have anything, Chairman. Thank you for asking, though, and allowing me to bat lead off. Excuse me, I do.
Uh-oh.
I take that all back. If we could go to page 3-6, membrane structure city ordinance, under the letter C, the letter C, it says exceptions to these standards may be made by the community planning director. Do we have one of those?
Community Development Director.
Community Development Director.
No, I think that would need to be changed.
Okay. City
Planning
administrator. 'Cause I think one of the variances somewhere else in here referred to the city administrator.
The
Is that who that would be here too?
The reference through the code pretty consistently is city administrator,
Administrator.
although
Or
really
assignee.
Or designee.
designee.
Okay.
Yes.
A lot of that was changed recently so that they could appoint who's going to do it. That was all changed probably within the last year or so for a lot of it. We started changing everything to administrator or assignee.
Perfect. Thank you.
But remember, that, those laws, those ordinance language was not enough. That was an old one we started with.
Okay.
We went with what the planning director has recommended by putting it in 17 instead of 8. So that's for historical.
No, my only question was, what is our community development director? I was unaware of that position, and it's been changed, so I'm a happy guy.
All right. Okay, I do. First of all, thanks again for this list that you put together. And I looked up 495 Arlington to see what that sign for tenant was going to be. So I appreciated that now I could see that stuff. If someone were to build a house on a lot like the one that got built on Arlington, the great big house, would that come in as, that would come in like the Tryon Way house? So,
Correct.
so then we could go down to Clackamas County and get a look at what the elevation would be? Because, I mean, that was my whole issue with that one house, that I'm sure it meets the 34 feet or whatever, but it's just huge.
What are you trying to figure out?
Well, can we see, as a person, could I go down and see then what it's going to look like?
You could, in the building permit records, they usually put the
Right.
plans online, and they're in the county's database for building permits. But you could, certainly it's public record, so you could go down and look at the plans, but they would already have been approved and issued at
Mhm.
this point, that they're on the list.
Is that available under the assessor's link?
It's under the building codes page. If you go to the county's website and then under department building codes, there's a permit lookup search there.
Okay, well then, it kind of comes back to what Natalie had said a few months ago, a year ago, about the building downtown that did get to do a new facade, although instead of it going in like the old style, it went straight across and it looked very industrial. It didn't kind of fall into what the downtown was going to look like. But they were following the letter of the law, so they didn't need to come before us.
Right, as a remodel, actually.
Right. How do we do that so bizarre things that are going to fall in legally still have a chance to be addressed?
I'm not sure about the facade project, but
that was before your time.
Anything that would require a design review that's a new commercial project or a change of use, say something's going from like a clock repair shop to a restaurant, we would put that through a design review process where we would look at the signage and building facade. And
in the past, we never got notified on any of that.
And some of these
and we want to be.
And some are fairly minor remodels, but when you're changing the facade of the front of a building on Portland Avenue, the impact's going to go a lot farther than it might elsewhere.
When we're looking at the sign permit regulations, I mean, to be honest, there's a lot of improvement in the sign regulations section if you had, specific design criteria, and I think that's kind of the intent of the downtown revitalization plan too, and recommendations is maybe having a vision for maybe stricter or more kind of directed signage requirements and facade requirements to kind of help it be more in line with the revitalization plan.
Right.
But right now, the signage requirements, it's size and square footage, and that's kind of what any sign application or kind of notification that comes through, we're checking off to make sure it's consistent with that. But as far as, just a tenant improvement for the same existing commercial use or facade improvement, if you're not changing a business use or really significantly expanding it, that's not going to come before you. That's just, I'm going to look at that as part of a building permit.
Yeah, and the sign wasn't really an issue for me, and I was just kind of putting, like about that facade from a year ago, would have been nice to know about it, so it could have been kept somewhat
have the continuity of what our vision is.
Of everything. And the fact that house, the one with the accessory dwelling unit with the extra garage, it looks like it's a duplex now.
Right. That
would have been nice if somehow that could be captured and we could see that, even though they're following everything for a residential house. I feel that the house on Arlington falls under that too. When you're coming up Arlington, it looks like, oh my gosh, they put in a new business up here because the slide looks just like a business wall. Has anyone else noticed that besides me?
Yeah, no, I noticed it.
It would be nice to hear about stuff like that because I sure hate to have that be my neighborhood. Like, the people who weren't happy with other things. That's what I'm saying. Like, if it's, do you look at the stuff? Do you look at the permit stuff? Who actually looks? It's you within. So I guess just subjectively, if you see something that's like a modern house where there are all the craftsman houses on Arlington, is there any way you can tag stuff like that for us to look at?
I mean, that's really subjective.
It
would be great if you had kind of criteria if you wanted me to notify you in situations X, Y, and Z, if, the height's 10% taller than the surrounding neighborhood. But, I mean, the workload of me reviewing it and putting it on a list, I mean, that's something to take into consideration. Depending on your criteria, I mean, I'm open to that, but that you maybe could discuss more about what you want to be notified about. I mean, we're putting the building permits all on here after they've been issued, so you can track them, and the building plans are available online. But if there's ones you want pulled out specifically for certain issues or in certain areas of the city, we could also track that and organize it separately on here.
Yeah, and I don't mean to create a burden for you. And if there's some mechanism that you could just put in that it dings if it's 10% over the height that's surrounding without having to actually do anything yourself, okay. If not, then no, I wouldn't expect that or want that. Just if something really kind of popped out at you while you're going through. And yeah, totally subjective. But
then she wouldn't know unless she looked at it and drove by the site.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, how would you know in Arlington that they all are built that way, right?
if you're familiar somewhat with the area, not, I
Yeah,
mean, not
but
intimately.
you have to look at
Yeah.
things
Right,
transparent, in transparency, I think. And as long as they follow the code, I don't think it's gonna
Right.
put a red flag
Okay.
up or hurt.
Correct.
I try to look at street view, but again, I mean, if they're meeting the code criteria, there's really nothing we can do to limit the
Okay.
way that it's
Yeah.
being developed. So it's good to be notified, but we are bound by what the
What the
code says,
codes
and
are.
I'm reviewing every
We'll
single
fix the
building
code
permit.
for you someday to give you something to work with.
And-
Are you referring to that new building that's on the south side of the street on Arlington between Portland Avenue
Or
and
compatibility
Safeway?
that the
Okay.
structure can't
Yeah, that does
be
seem
more
slightly
than
out of place.
10% taller than the building next door.
There is not, and there's really nothing in here about kind of continuity of neighborhood character, community
Yeah.
character, anything like that. I mean, that would be something that was helpful, kind of guidelines where I could, dig in a little bit more in terms of the design requirements.
Mhm.
and
There's
looking
soon to
at
be a
building
community planning, group here in Gladstone that's got Randy, what's her last name? Thomas.
Thomas.
And, Brian Early, as you guys all know who they
Mhm.
are. And once that group is created, they could proactively do that without creating,
Mhm.
paid staff to have to do those kind of things, I think. So you have a good suggestion. And when they form that group, I think you should go there and talk to them.
Mhm. Okay.
And I think that would be a good one for them to look at those things.
Thank you.
Good job, thank you. Les?
I would just repeat a message from our last meeting, and that is, tolling may be coming. And so we're gonna have to really think about what our TSP, our transportation plan, how it's gonna affect it. If people start trying to divert around 205,
I already do.
our planning department will be so busy that you'll never get a day off. So, I think that's an issue that hopefully will rise to the discussion on the council level, and I just want to reiterate that message that's one of those elephants that's looming in the corner. Thank you.
Malachi?
I don't have anything.
I'm just curious what the status is regarding the T-Bose property.
on my list. So I met with their representative last week,
Okay.
and he has a copy of the updated design review application. He is working on meeting all of the landscaping requirements. So what
Okay.
they're doing is and I'll give you a little bit of background too, which would be helpful in the context, which may be repetitive from last month, but that's okay. So the design review that was issued, that Clay worked on for the modification of it from a restaurant to a car dealership, all that said in terms of landscaping requirements was just to maintain in place. So maintain the existing landscaping areas. There wasn't, a breakdown of what the square footage was or a landscaping plan that showed, so we're going off of really aerial photos from before the decision was issued. So there, they could, I explained to him, you could make and go the route where you're just maintaining the existing landscaping and you guys put it back where it's now paved. Alternatively, per the code, they do have the option in a design, because they're going through a new design review, of just reconfiguring where the landscaping area is, meeting that coverage threshold and requirement in the
There's
code.
setbacks though too for the landscaping from the sidewalk to wherever is there.
They can do, it's a bit more complicated than that. Like they can apply to do turf in the right of way.
And I think also
they
the bottom
can,
right corner had the extra area we were trying to protect. Is that gone?
So what they're proposing is to modify and move around their landscaping, I think, so that they can have display and storage of cars in that area where it's paved right now. Whether or not that's something that we want to approve on a staff level, or the code gives us the flexibility to recommend approval or denial of that, is something we don't know yet, because I haven't seen their proposed plan. They don't know what they're going to be removing and proposing landscaping of where it's currently paved, unpermitted paving. So we're not sure exactly what they're going to be proposing yet. So I don't know whether or not it's going to be consistent with the code.
I would like to request that when they do come back with a plan, that they come before us as well, because that is a large chunk of, here you are, Gladstone. So it's
Right.
really kind of important how that area looks. And also I wanted to know, were you able to follow up on whether or not they got permits to remove asbestos and
So they're currently working with our building codes department. They do, as far as I know, and as far as building codes is aware, they have all the required permits to do. It was more than asbestos, as it was explained to me. It was water damage. So they're working with building codes, and they're not in violation of any of the building permits.
But when they removed all that stuff.
The paving was, though, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
the paving is certainly, and I mean, we gave them a copy of the native plant list in Gladstone, the prohibited plant list. I mean, we're working with them to try to improve the aesthetics of that property, and I'm bound, we're bound by what the code allows or requires in terms of landscaping, but they're very eager to work with the community and remediate the violation. So
I did email Sean about, I think everybody saw my question to him. I was hoping he would just include something in our packet for everybody, but I'm not sure if that's going to happen. So the question I had asked him was in regards to the violation, if we approve a new permit and then they violate again, what that process is. And what he stated was it would be treated as a brand new violation. It wouldn't have any link really to the old violation. And just in case it doesn't show up in the packet, I just want to make sure I express to you guys all what Sean had said.
Thank you.
And it will be coming before you as a design review application.
Good.
So you would be seeing the landscaping plans prepared by a certified landscape architect.
Good.
I mean, there's a little gray area in the code there, but we recommended to them that they have it prepared by a professional to help them map out all the coverage areas so we can really clearly see that.
Okay.
So they're working with a upgraded application, and so they know the submittal requirements, so they'll be giving a complete application, and then that would be coming before you in a design review.
Thank you.
Thank you. So what they illegally paved, that's going to be allowed to stay, or is there,
I don't know how you would fix it.
you could unpave it and put in dirt again, that's
We'll
how
have
you
to
could
look at
fix
their,
it.
Well, there was that little bit of wetland or something on the corner, right?
Yeah. And they were not supposed to touch that.
So they have to pull it out and restore it the best they can, but not be rewarded with leaving illegal concrete there.
it's called abatement, I think, right?
Sounds like a good word for it, but I mean, they just shouldn't be, in my opinion, they shouldn't be able to keep the concrete where they weren't allowed to put it,
And
regardless.
the code allows them to pave areas of the property and store cars there. It's just is runoff and erosion control being managed according to the other regulations and Oak Lodge requirements. So there's going to be coordination there.
But it wasn't that, it was the wetland that we had denied certain parts of it.
I didn't see that anywhere in the decision, and there's no mapped wetland as far as I'm aware of on
Pretty sure it
the
was like the
site.
bottom right corner of the map when we saw the landscaping plan.
Yeah, you're not thinking of Tonkin, are you?
That's Tonkin, I think.
I thought it was the Tebow one.
I don't remember any wetlands
Remember, I
on
think it was
Tebow.
Tonkin.
Tonkin's one is the
Tonkin
wetland in
has
the
a
back
wetland.
corner.
Never mind.
But they did do some violations. Let's just be
Yeah.
real about it here.
All right.
Anything?
Nope, not tonight. Becky.
I've got just a couple of things, and one of them was Tebow's. The other one is Autotown, the dealership on the corner of 99 and Gloucester. They have started construction, and they're still violating the city ordinance by parking vehicles in the landscape area. And it's specific in our decision to them that they not do that, even though it was in the code, that they not park vehicles there, and they still are.
Which section, near
Gloucester?
the freeway section or?
On the whole corner on Gloucester and 99, the
So-
Autotown dealership.
So that is not only in violation of what we said, but also what ODOT said.
Right, so it's a violation of several,
Oh, you're talking about town and country.
no, Autotown.
Talking about the frontage on McLaughlin,
Right.
right?
Oh, where the
At
Oldsmobile
at
place
the-
was?
Yeah, it's now a,
Right.
is it
GMC.
still, it's GMC, and-
Still
Okay.
General Motors.
but they have, remember they had the great plans and everything?
Yes.
and it was like,
Two-stage.
you guys did a really good job of this, and
It was
yeah,
just last
too-
year they came before us.
Right,
yeah.
and then, of course, it wasn't anybody that owned the place, it was just their planner that did it.
Okay.
But they, you know, we need to notify them that they're in violation, they need to comply with the landscape, you know, the requirements of the landscape.
So we have a design review application in from them right now. It's my understanding, as far as I'm aware, that they never did the addition that was permitted in the last
Well,
design
they had,
review application.
they had a two-stage that they were gonna do.
Right,
So
I
now
remember that.
they have a different plan that they're going, they've already started construction, they've got some stuff going on
They
there
might be
now.
Stage 2.
I wasn't aware of that, so definitely follow up with Sean. And if they're doing construction before they even have building permits or design review approval, then that's a violation he can follow up on, certainly.
Let's get those cars off the landscape and go from there. So when do you think we'll see the Autotown?
I'm hoping to have it on next month's agenda.
I
It
think
sounds like a long meeting.
I think you'll find all of us are very concerned about what's going on in our community, and we're all watching,
Yeah.
and we're all going to bring it to your attention.
No, and I appreciate that, because you all have the local knowledge.
In the
so it's
past,
great.
In the past, the codes were extremely lax and not enforced, and all of us seem to have our passions about certain areas, which is awesome because it's diverse, and we see things, and we're gonna say, what about this? We want to know about it, because it didn't come before us, and they're not
Right.
doing what they said.
Right, and
So-
that's great. And I will say, they were initially trying to maintain a non-conforming landscape coverage amount. However, I went back in time and looked at Google Earth and saw that they don't have a non-conforming coverage because they've had more trees there over the past, and that they've removed in the last like 5 years or something.
So I think
So they updated their landscaping plan consistent with the coverage amount we identified as being there.
So that, okay, I think that might be related to the two-stage thing, because they said during stage 1, they would be non-conforming with landscape because it would be finished in stage 2.
They didn't make that same
Statement this time?
statement in the application, but the landscaping plan that's been revised as part of their submittal has, if I'm remembering correctly, has over 20% landscape coverage, and they would be putting in dogwood trees along the frontage, and other kind of buffering landscape requirements, but it will come before you, and we will be doing a staff recommendation and looking at the details very carefully there, and I'll follow up with Sean on the enforcement.
Oh, you're going to, I was just going to say, did you want him to talk to Sean, or are you going to?
If you want to talk to Sean as well, but he'll probably call me and want to know
But
what...
I agree, the cars should be off the
That's fine, you can
landscaping.
take care of that.
It would be ideal if they're not violating when they're asking for another approval.
Did they find them out the first permit?
No, it's my understanding they let it expire before they completed or got the building permit issued for the addition.
That was over a year ago?
But I haven't had enough time to
I think
dig
it
in on that
was.
one yet.
That makes sense, because we did put a requirement in there that they had to renew it within a year.
Good job
I
on
remember that.
Yeah, Malachi did a good job on getting that stuff in there.
Yeah, sorry, we may be a thorn in your side.
No, I appreciate it. It's great.
Okay.
Anything else?
I think we're good.
All right, anybody want to make a motion that we adjourn?
Yes.
I had one quick item to
Sorry.
bring up, if that's okay.
Yeah.
24-Hour Fitness, they're asking for their final certificate of occupancy through the county building codes department. There have been various compliance problems with them meeting all the conditions of their decision. Most, if not all of those, have been remedied, such as shielding the lighting, landscaping, the interior light being shielded at nighttime. So we would just be double checking on planning's end to make sure they're compliant with all of the final conditions of approval in the decision, and then signing off, giving planning check for the certificate of occupancy. If any of you see anything that raises a red flag or there's any issue before we issue the certificate of occupancy, please let me know, and I can wait until next week, at the end of next week, if you want.
It's probably important that Sean would do a walkthrough as well, I would think.
I can coordinate with him
Yeah,
on that.
I think that would be good.
Okay.
And does he do that at night when the lights are out? I mean...
He has been doing that periodically. It's my understanding they now have blinds, interior blinds, that they close completely when it gets dark.
Well, I asked that only because I didn't know about the final certificates of occupancy, and would that car place where Tebow's was, did they get their final, or no? Obviously not, because I would hope that someone would check their lights, because I haven't driven by when it's late enough to have the lights on, but it looked like it was going right into the house next door, the big gray house.
There were some complaints about it.
Mhm.
Oh, were there? That's
I mean,
good.
somebody had mentioned it here.
Well, I
Yeah.
think I
That
mentioned it
meeting,
looked
right?
like it, but I hope somebody,
A
someone did.
citizen
Good.
or two came before us that one time and said, the lights are just going directly into our house.
So, does Sean normally get involved with certificate of occupancy?
No, not unless it's an active violation. He wouldn't do a walkthrough normally or do anything like that, right, Tim?
Would it be reasonable to have him involved in that process? To sign off on it?
I
You
think
have
it
a-
would be.
Mhm.
I mean, they have the
He's our code enforcement.
inspector who's
A
inspecting, right?
building
Yeah,
inspector.
yeah. I mean, like, I hear what you're saying, but, I mean,
Something-
they do, inspectors are pretty good, and that's their job, you know?
Yeah.
Something I have done is put a hold on the building permit, saying they have to have planning sign off, like for SGCs, or not for SGCs, we do that before the building permit's issued, but we just did that recently for public improvements on Donnellan Way. They had, the decision said they had to have their sidewalks in before we could issue the final certificate of occupancy, so I just put a note in there for the building inspector to call planning before they issued the certificate to confirm the sidewalks had been built.
Okay.
Good.
So we can put notes in there to hold it
Good.
Before it's issued.
No, my reason for suggesting he do a walkthrough at the fitness was because you said there were some compliance issues. And that's why I wouldn't say that, I mean, I think it would be good, but I know he's got other things to do. But when there has been issues, to make sure they've been completely completed and closed out, I think he should.
Okay.
I can follow up with the city administrator on that and ask
Okay.
her about that.
Okay.
Well, so for the car one, could there be a note in there to make sure that the lights have been corrected so that that they are in compliance?
We would, it's my assumption we would be looking at all of that as part of their new design review application. So we could put a condition, or you, the planning commission, could put a condition on there if I don't already recommend one in the
I think we
staff
had one
report.
last time for dark skies.
Yeah, I
And
think-
we had
Right.
people come to us
We did.
and
Mhm.
complain that they weren't complying with it.
So we could include that same condition in the new decision, because I understand that the old decision's expired. So we could put that on there again, and then if they are not in compliance with that, it would be a new violation.
Okay.
Anything else?
I think I'm done.
We're good.
It's late.
I thought this was going to be a short
Do
meeting.
we have a motion to adjourn?
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I make a
move-
motion. Go ahead. No, you go
First.
ahead. No, you go ahead.
I move that we adjourn.
Pat Smith,
I second it.
Natalie Smith, we're adjourned.